Hello, and welcome to this quiet hour. Tonight, we're going to explore something you've known since childhood, but perhaps never truly considered. The way sound travels away from us, meets the world, and returns. An echo is one of nature's gentlest mysteries, a reminder that nothing we send into the universe is ever truly lost. You can let your shoulders settle, if you'd like. There's no hurry here. No urgency in what we're about to discover together. Perhaps you're winding down after a long day, or maybe you've been searching for something to ease your mind toward rest. Either way, you're welcome here. The science of sound reflection is vast and beautiful, but it unfolds slowly, like a conversation held in a canyon at dusk. If these journeys bring you comfort, you're welcome to return anytime. There are many such stories waiting, each one a doorway into the quiet wonders that surround us. Let's begin, then, with the simplest truth about echoes, a truth so fundamental that it shapes every cathedral, every canyon, every whispered word in an empty room. When you speak, you create a disturbance. Your vocal cords vibrate, and those vibrations travel outward through the air as waves of pressure, compressions and rarefactions, moving at roughly 343 meters per second at sea level, at room temperature. These waves are invisible, but they carry your voice, your meaning, your presence into the world. And when they meet something solid, a wall, a cliff face, a distant building, they don't simply vanish. They reflect, they return, they become echoes. The word itself comes from Greek mythology, from the story of a nymph named Echo who could only repeat the last words spoken to her. It's a fitting name for a phenomenon that seems almost conversational, as if the world is listening and responding in kind. But the science beneath the myth is even more beautiful. Sound reflection follows the same elegant principle as light reflection. When a sound wave strikes a surface, the angle at which it arrives, the angle of incidence, equals the angle at which it departs, the angle of reflection. This symmetry is one of nature's quiet patterns, appearing again and again across different phenomena, a kind of mathematical poetry written into the structure of reality. Not all surfaces reflect sound equally, though. A hard, smooth wall reflects sound waves efficiently, sending them back with much of their original energy intact. But a soft, porous surface, a curtain, a carpet, a forest floor covered in moss, absorbs the sound instead, converting its energy into tiny amounts of heat. This is why a furnished room sounds different from an empty one. The furniture, the fabrics, the small irregularities of a lived-in space all drink in the sound, softening it, preventing it from bouncing endlessly between bare walls. In an empty room with hard surfaces, sound can reflect dozens of times before it fades, each reflection slightly weaker than the last, the energy gradually dissipating into the air and the walls. This creates what acousticians call reverberation, a complex wash of overlapping echoes that can make a single handclap sound like a sustained note, or turn a whisper into something that seems to fill an entire space. Reverberation time is measured as the duration it takes for a sound to decrease by 60 decibels, which is roughly the difference between normal conversation and near silence. In a small, carpeted bedroom, this might be just a fraction of a second. In a large cathedral with stone walls and vaulted ceilings, it can stretch to 8 or 10 seconds, or even longer. Every sound lingers, overlapping with the next, creating that characteristic sacred atmosphere that humans have associated with grand spaces for thousands of years. The ancient Greeks understood this intuitively, even without modern acoustics. They built their amphitheaters with careful attention to how sound would travel and reflect. The theater of Epidaurus, constructed in the 4th century BCE, is so acoustically refined that a person standing at the center of the circular stage can speak in a normal voice and be heard clearly by someone sitting in the highest row, more than 60 meters away. Recent studies have shown that the limestone seats themselves act as acoustic filters, suppressing low-frequency background noise while allowing the higher frequencies of human speech to propagate clearly. The Greeks didn't have spectrometers or frequency analyzers, but they had keen ears and patient observation, and they built something that still astonishes acousticians today. Echoes have always fascinated humans, perhaps because they seem to suggest that the world is listening, that it has a memory, however brief. In folklore and literature, echoes often take on mystical qualities. They're the voices of spirits, or the residue of past events, or portals to other realms. But the reality is no less wondrous. An echo is proof that sound is physical, that it travels through space, that it interacts with matter, that it can be shaped and directed and transformed. The speed of sound is not constant. It changes with temperature, humidity, and atmosphere pressure. In warmer air, sound travels faster because the molecules are moving more energetically, colliding more frequently, passing the wave along more quickly. At 0 degrees Celsius, sound travels at about 331 meters per second. At 20 degrees Celsius, it's closer to 343 meters per second. This might seem like a small difference, but over long distances, it becomes significant. On a hot summer day, sound travels differently than on a cold winter night, and the echoes reflect that difference. Humidity also affects sound speed, though in a way that might seem counterintuitive. Moist air is actually less dense than dry air because water molecules are lighter than nitrogen and oxygen molecules. So sound travels slightly faster in humid conditions. This is why summer nights, when the air is warm and humid, can carry sounds farther and more clearly than dry winter evenings. Wind adds another layer of complexity. Sound waves moving with the wind travel faster relative to the ground, while sound waves moving against the wind travel slower. But wind also bends sound waves, refracting them in ways that can create acoustic shadows, regions where sound is surprisingly quiet, or acoustic hotspots where sound is unexpectedly loud. On a windy day, you might struggle to hear someone shouting just 50 meters away, while on a calm evening, a whispered conversation can carry for surprising distances. All of these factors come together to create the acoustic environment we experience every day, usually without conscious awareness. But when we pause to listen, when we pay attention to how sound moves through space, we begin to notice the subtle architecture of the auditory world. Consider a simple echo in a narrow canyon. You shout, and a moment later, your voice returns to you. The delay tells you something about the distance to the reflecting surface. If the echo returns in 1 second, the sound has traveled to the wall and back, covering twice the distance between you and the wall. Since sound travels at roughly 343 meters per second, that means the wall is about 170 meters away. Ancient sailors used this principle to navigate in fog, shouting toward unseen cliffs and timing the echoes to estimate their distance from shore. But echoes can be more complex than a single reflection. In a space with multiple reflecting surfaces, a city street lined with tall buildings, for instance, sound can bounce back and forth many times, creating a cascade of echoes that blur together. This is why urban environments often sound so different from natural ones. The hard surfaces of concrete and glass reflect sound efficiently, creating a dense acoustic texture that can be overwhelming or energizing, depending on your perspective. In nature, echoes tend to be softer, more diffuse. Trees absorb sound, their leaves and bark, and the irregular surfaces of their trunks scattering sound waves in many directions. A forest is acoustically complex, full of small reflections and absorptions that create a sense of acoustic intimacy. Sound doesn't travel as far in a forest as it does across an open field, and the echoes that do occur are gentler, less distinct. Water creates its own acoustic world. Sound travels much faster in water than in air, about 1,500 meters per second in seawater, more than 4 times the speed in air. This is because water is denser and less compressible than air, allowing sound waves to propagate more efficiently. Whales and dolphins exploit this property, using sound to communicate across vast distances. A blue whale's call, at the right depth and under the right conditions, can travel for hundreds of kilometers through the ocean, reflecting off the seafloor and the surface, bending through layers of water at different temperatures, creating an acoustic landscape that we're only beginning to understand. The ocean itself acts as a kind of acoustic waveguide, with sound refracting through layers of varying temperature and salinity. There's a layer called the SOFAR channel, the sound fixing and ranging channel, where sound waves become trapped and can travel for thousands of kilometers with minimal loss of energy. This channel sits at a depth where the temperature and pressure create a minimum in sound speed, causing sound waves to bend back toward the channel whenever they stray above or below it. It's a natural acoustic highway, and marine mammals have likely been using it for millions of years. On land, temperature gradients also affect sound propagation. On a typical day, air temperature decreases with altitude, and this causes sound waves to bend upward, away from the ground. But at night, especially on clear nights, the ground cools faster than the air above it, creating a temperature inversion. In these conditions, sound waves bend downward, staying closer to the ground and traveling much farther than they would during the day. This is why distant sounds, a train, a highway, a faraway conversation, can seem so much clearer and closer on a still night. These temperature effects create what are sometimes called acoustic mirages. You might hear a sound that seems to come from one direction when the source is actually elsewhere. The sound waves bent and redirected by the invisible architecture of the atmosphere. It's a reminder that sound doesn't travel in straight lines through the real world. It curves, reflects, refracts, and scatters, following paths determined by the physical properties of the medium it moves through. The study of these paths, of how sound moves through complex environments, is called acoustic propagation, and it's a field that blends physics, mathematics, and environmental science. Researchers use sophisticated computer models to predict how sound will behave in different settings, from concert halls to city streets to underwater environments. These models account for temperature, humidity, wind, surface materials, and countless other variables, creating virtual soundscapes that can be explored and optimized before anything is built. But even with all our technology, there's something irreducibly experiential about sound. You can model it, measure it, analyze it, but to truly understand it, you have to listen. You have to stand in the space, close your eyes, and pay attention to how sound arrives at your ears, how it changes as you move, how it feels. This is what acoustic designers do when they're creating spaces for music or speech. They walk through the space, clap their hands, speak, listen. They're feeling for the character of the reflections, the warmth or coldness of the reverberation, the presence or absence of unwanted echoes. It's a kind of listening that's both analytical and intuitive, scientific and artistic. One of the challenges in acoustic design is controlling flutter echoes, rapid, repetitive echoes that occur between two parallel reflective surfaces. If you've ever clapped your hands in an empty gymnasium or parking garage and heard a strange, fluttering sound in response, you've experienced this phenomenon. The sound bounces back and forth between the parallel walls so quickly that the individual echoes blur together into a distinctive metallic or chirping sound. It's not usually desirable in spaces meant for music or speech, so designers introduce angled surfaces, absorptive materials, or diffusive elements to break up the parallel reflections. Diffusion is a particularly elegant solution. Instead of absorbing sound or reflecting it in a single direction, a diffusive surface scatters sound in many directions, creating a sense of spaciousness without the harshness of strong echoes or the deadness of heavy absorption. Diffusers often have complex, irregular surfaces, arrays of wells of varying depths, or geometric patterns that break up the wavefront of incoming sound. The result is a space that sounds lively and open, but not harsh or echoey. The science of diffusion draws on some beautiful mathematics, particularly number theory. One common type of diffuser is based on quadratic residue sequences, a concept from pure mathematics that turns out to have perfect applications in acoustics. The depths of the wells in the diffuser follow a mathematical sequence that ensures sound is scattered evenly across a wide range of frequencies. It's one of those unexpected connections between abstract mathematics and tangible, audible reality. A reminder that the patterns we discover in numbers often reflect patterns in the physical world. Echoes also play a crucial role in how we perceive space and distance. Even in a dark room, you can get a sense of the room's size from the sound of your footsteps or your voice. This is because your brain is constantly analyzing the reflections, the timing and tone of the echoes, and using that information to construct a mental model of your surroundings. It's a process that happens mostly unconsciously, but it's remarkably sophisticated. Blind individuals often develop this spatial hearing to a remarkable degree. Some can navigate complex environments using echolocation, making clicking sounds with their tongues and listening to the reflections. The brain learns to interpret the subtle differences in the returning echoes, distinguishing between a wall and an open doorway, between a parked car and a tree, between different textures and materials. Studies using brain imaging have shown that in expert echolocators, the visual cortex, the part of the brain normally devoted to processing sight, becomes active during echolocation, suggesting that the brain is treating the acoustic information as a form of spatial vision. This human echolocation is a pale echo, so to speak, of what bats and dolphins can do. Bats emit ultrasonic calls far above the range of human hearing and listen to the returning echoes with extraordinary precision. They can detect insects as small as mosquitoes in complete darkness, tracking them through the air with acrobatic precision. The bat's brain processes the echoes in real time, creating a detailed acoustic image of the world around it, a world of sound rather than light. Different bat species use different echolocation strategies. Some emit long, constant frequency calls, listening for the Doppler shift in the returning echo to detect moving prey. Others use short, frequency-modulated calls that sweep through a range of frequencies, providing more detailed information about the distance and texture of objects. It's a diverse and sophisticated array of techniques, evolved over millions of years, each adapted to the bat's particular hunting strategy and environment. Dolphins and toothed whales use echolocation underwater, where vision is often limited by darkness or turbidity. A dolphin's echolocation clicks are among the loudest sounds produced by any animal, reaching intensities of over 200 decibels. These clicks are focused into a narrow beam by the melon, a fatty organ in the dolphin's forehead, and the returning echoes are received through the lower jaw and transmitted to the inner ear. The dolphin can adjust the frequency, intensity, and directionality of its clicks, tailoring its sonar to the task at hand. Whether it's navigating through murky water, hunting for fish buried in the seafloor, or communicating with other dolphins, the precision of dolphin echolocation is astonishing. Experiments have shown that dolphins can distinguish between objects that differ in size by just a few millimeters, even from several meters away. They can detect the internal structure of objects, identifying whether a sphere is hollow or solid, or whether a fish is buried beneath the sand. It's a sensory world that's difficult for humans to fully imagine, but the underlying principle, sound reflecting off objects and returning with information, is the same principle that creates the echoes we hear in a canyon or a concert hall. Humans have learned to harness this principle in technologies like sonar and ultrasound. Sonar, which stands for sound navigation and ranging, works exactly like biological echolocation. A device emits a sound pulse, usually at a frequency optimized for the task, and listens for the reflections. By measuring the time delay and analyzing the character of the returning echo, the system can determine the distance, size, shape, and sometimes even the material composition of objects. Sonar is used for mapping the seafloor, detecting submarines, finding schools of fish, and countless other applications. Medical ultrasound uses the same principle at much higher frequencies, typically between 2 and 18 megahertz, far above the range of human hearing. These high-frequency sound waves can penetrate soft tissues and reflect off boundaries between different types of tissue, creating detailed images of the inside of the body. It's a non-invasive, safe way to visualize developing fetuses, diagnose medical conditions, and guide surgical procedures. The echoes from inside your body, analyzed and processed by sophisticated electronics, become images on a screen. Another example of sound reflection, revealing hidden structure. The speed of sound in human tissue is different from its speed in air or water, about 1,540 meters per second on average, though it varies slightly between different tissue types. This variation is what creates the contrast in ultrasound images. Bone reflects ultrasound strongly, appearing bright on the image, while fluid-filled spaces like the bladder or amniotic sac allow sound to pass through easily, appearing dark. The patterns of reflection and transmission create a map of internal anatomy, all from the echoes of sound waves too high for us to hear. Even the Earth itself can be studied through sound reflection. Seismic waves, vibrations traveling through the ground, reflect off layers of rock with different densities and compositions. By setting off controlled explosions or using specialized vibrating trucks and analyzing the reflections with arrays of sensitive geophones, geologists can create detailed maps of underground structures. This is how oil and gas deposits are located, how earthquake faults are studied, how we've learned about the layered structure of the Earth's interior. The echoes of vibrations traveling through rock, returning to the surface with information about what they've encountered, telling us stories about the hidden architecture of the planet. The principle extends even to the cosmic scale. Radio telescopes can detect echoes of signals bouncing off distant objects in space. Radar astronomy uses radio waves to map the surfaces of planets and moons, measuring their distances with extraordinary precision. The first accurate measurement of the distance to Venus was made by bouncing radar signals off the planet and timing the return, a cosmic echo spanning millions of kilometers. But let's return to the more immediate, more tangible echoes of everyday experience. Think about the sound of rain. Each raindrop striking a surface creates a tiny sound, a miniature impact that sends out a brief pulse of sound waves. In an open field, these sounds are small and isolated, but under a roof or in a forest, the sounds reflect and overlap, creating the characteristic patter and rush of rainfall. The acoustic texture of rain is largely a product of reflections, sound bouncing off leaves, off the ground, off walls and windows, all blending together into that soothing, complex wash of sound that so many people find calming. Thunder, too, is shaped by reflections. The lightning bolt creates a sudden, intense heating of the air along its path, generating a shock wave that we hear as thunder. But the sound we actually hear is rarely a simple boom. It's usually a prolonged rumble, a rolling, growling sound that can last for many seconds. This is partly because different parts of the lightning bolt are at different distances from us, so the sound arrives at slightly different times. But it's also because the sound reflects off the ground, off clouds, off hills and buildings, creating a complex series of echoes that extend and modulate the original sound. The character of thunder, whether it's a sharp crack or a low rumble, depends on the distance to the lightning, the shape of the landscape, and the acoustic properties of the atmosphere. In mountains, echoes can be particularly dramatic. The steep rock faces and deep valleys create ideal conditions for strong, clear reflections. Mountaineers sometimes use echoes to estimate distances or to locate themselves in fog, shouting and listening for the returning sound. There are places in the Alps where a single shout can produce a series of distinct echoes, each one returning from a different peak or cliff face, creating a chorus of voices that seem to answer from all directions. Some locations have become famous for their echoes. The Echo Wall at the Temple of Heaven in Beijing is a circular wall that reflects sound so efficiently that a whisper at one point on the wall can be heard clearly at the opposite side, more than 60 meters away. The sound travels along the curved wall, reflecting inward, guided by the geometry of the circle. It's an acoustic phenomenon that has delighted visitors for centuries, a demonstration of how shape and material can sculpt sound in surprising ways. In the ancient world, echoes sometimes had sacred significance. Certain caves or rock formations that produced particularly strong or unusual echoes were considered holy sites, places where the gods spoke or where the boundary between worlds was thin. We can understand this response. There's something uncanny about hearing your own voice return to you from the darkness, transformed slightly, delayed, as if the world itself is responding. It's easy to imagine how, without a scientific framework for understanding sound reflection, such experiences might seem supernatural. But even with our modern understanding, echoes retain a certain magic. They remind us that sound is not instantaneous, that it takes time to travel through space, that it interacts with the world in complex and beautiful ways. They make the invisible visible, or rather, the inaudible audible, revealing the presence of distant surfaces, the shape of spaces, the character of materials. The natural world holds countless chambers where echoes live in their own particular ways. In caves, the darkness is matched by a kind of acoustic stillness that makes every sound feel amplified and stretched. When you speak inside a limestone cavern, your voice doesn't simply bounce back. It lingers, wrapping around stalactites and stalagmites, finding pathways through narrow passages and wide chambers alike. The echo that returns is often softer, more diffuse, as if the stone itself has absorbed some of the urgency from your words. Scientists who study cave acoustics have found that the mineral composition of the rock matters deeply. Limestone, with its porous surface, absorbs more sound than granite, creating shorter, warmer echoes. Granite caves, by contrast, send back sharper reflections, sounds that feel more immediate and less forgiving. In the open air, echoes behave differently still. Stand at the edge of a canyon and call out, and you might hear your voice return 3, 4, even 5 times, each repetition a little quieter, a little more distant. This happens because sound waves travel outward in all directions, and in a canyon, they find multiple surfaces, cliff faces, rock outcroppings, distant walls, that send them bouncing back at different intervals. The result is a cascade of echoes, each one a ghost of the original sound, arriving at your ears in a gentle sequence. The Grand Canyon, for instance, can produce echoes that last several seconds, the sound traveling across miles of open space before returning. Indigenous peoples who lived in these landscapes understood the acoustic properties intimately, using calls and songs to communicate across distances, knowing exactly how sound would behave in their particular terrain. Forests, too, have their own acoustic character, though they rarely produce clear echoes. Trees absorb sound rather than reflecting it. The leaves, bark, and undergrowth all act as soft, irregular surfaces that scatter sound waves in countless directions. When you shout in a dense forest, your voice seems to vanish almost immediately, swallowed by the greenery. This is why forests feel so quiet, so enclosed. The absence of echoes creates a sense of intimacy, as if the world has drawn closer around you. In winter, when the leaves have fallen and the ground is covered in snow, the acoustic quality changes. Snow is an excellent sound absorber, even more effective than foliage. A snow-covered forest becomes one of the quietest places on Earth, a landscape where sound seems to exist only in the immediate moment, with no reflections, no lingering presence. Water surfaces create their own unique acoustic environments. When sound waves travel across a lake or ocean, they can reflect off the water's surface, but the behavior is complex. If the water is calm and flat, it acts almost like a mirror, reflecting sound waves at predictable angles. But if the surface is choppy, with waves and ripples, the reflections scatter in many directions, and the echo becomes diffuse, harder to distinguish. Sailors and fishermen have long known that sound travels differently over water, especially at night or in the early morning when the air is still. Voices can carry for surprising distances across a calm bay, and the echoes that return from distant shores can sound eerily clear, as if the speaker were much closer than they actually are. Beneath the water, sound behaves in ways that seem almost magical. Water is denser than air, and sound waves travel through it much faster, about 4 times faster, in fact. This means that underwater echoes return more quickly, and distances can be deceptive. Whales and dolphins have evolved to use this property to their advantage, sending out clicks and calls that bounce off objects in the murky depths, painting a picture of their surroundings through sound alone. A dolphin's echolocation is so precise that it can detect a fish the size of a golf ball from hundreds of feet away, distinguishing not only the fish's location, but also its size, shape, and even the species. The clicks they produce are incredibly rapid, sometimes hundreds per second, and the echoes that return are processed by specialized structures in their skulls, allowing them to navigate and hunt in complete darkness. Human-made structures also create distinctive acoustic environments, each one shaped by the materials and geometry involved. A parking garage, for instance, is a place where echoes can feel almost overwhelming. The concrete walls and ceilings are hard and smooth, perfect reflectors of sound. When a car door slams, the sound bounces back and forth between surfaces, creating a dense web of overlapping echoes that can last several seconds. The low ceilings and parallel walls create what's called a flutter echo, a rapid repetition of sound that can make even a simple footstep sound like a cascade of clicks. Some people find this disorienting, but there's a certain fascination in it too. The way a single sound can multiply and fill a space so completely. Stairwells and tall buildings have a similar quality. The vertical shaft acts like a kind of acoustic tunnel, channeling sound upward and downward with remarkable efficiency. If you stand at the bottom of a stairwell and speak, your voice can travel up 10, 15, even 20 floors, bouncing off each landing and wall as it goes. People at the top might hear your words clearly, though by the time the sound reaches them, it's been reflected dozens of times. This is why stairwells often feel so alive with sound, why a distant door closing can echo through the entire structure. Architects and engineers have learned to manage these acoustic properties, adding sound-absorbing materials or designing stairwells with irregular shapes to prevent echoes from becoming too intense. Concert halls represent the pinnacle of intentional acoustic design, spaces where every surface, every angle, every material has been chosen to shape the way sound reflects and travels. The goal is not to eliminate echoes, but to control them, to create a rich, enveloping sound that reaches every listener with clarity and warmth. The walls and ceilings of a great concert hall are often covered in carefully shaped panels that diffuse sound, scattering reflections in many directions so that the music seems to come from everywhere at once. The floor is usually made of wood, which reflects higher frequencies while absorbing some of the lower ones, creating a balanced sound. Even the seats are designed with acoustics in mind. upholstered to absorb sound when empty, but shaped so that when filled with people, the overall acoustic remains consistent. One of the most famous concert halls in the world, the Musikverein in Vienna, achieves its legendary sound through a combination of proportions and materials. The hall is rectangular, with a high ceiling and ornate plaster decorations that help scatter sound evenly. The wooden floor and the tall windows, though covered with heavy curtains during performances, all contribute to the warm, resonant quality that musicians and audiences have cherished for over a century. When an orchestra plays in such a space, the sound doesn't just travel directly to your ears. It arrives from above, from the sides, from behind, a three-dimensional experience built entirely on the careful management of reflections. In contrast, outdoor amphitheaters rely on natural geometry to shape sound. The ancient Greeks discovered that a semicircular arrangement of stone seats, rising in tiers, could focus sound from the stage toward the audience with remarkable efficiency. The theater of Epidaurus, built in the 4th century BCE, is still celebrated for its acoustics. A coin dropped to the center of the stage can be heard clearly in the back row, some 200 feet away. Recent studies have shown that the limestone seats act as acoustic filters, absorbing low-frequency background noise while allowing the higher frequencies of human speech and music to reflect cleanly. The result is a space where even a whisper can carry to thousands of listeners without any amplification. Modern sports stadiums face a different acoustic challenge. The goal is often to contain and amplify crowd noise, creating an intense, energizing atmosphere. Enclosed stadiums with hard surfaces and low ceilings can become incredibly loud, with sound levels reaching 130 decibels or more during key moments, louder than a jet engine at close range. The echoes in such spaces are chaotic, overlapping and reinforcing each other in ways that make individual sounds difficult to distinguish. But the overall effect is a wall of noise that can be thrilling for fans and intimidating for opposing teams. Some stadiums are specifically designed to maximize this effect, with roofs that angle downward toward the field, reflecting crowd noise back onto the players below. Religious spaces have long been designed with acoustics in mind, though the goals vary by tradition. Gothic cathedrals, with their soaring ceilings and stone walls, create long, reverberant echoes that can make a single voice or instrument sound like a choir. Gregorian chant, with its slow, sustained notes, was developed partly in response to these acoustic conditions. The long reverberation time, sometimes 6 seconds or more, means that each note lingers in the air, blending with the notes that follow. This creates a layered, ethereal quality that enhances the spiritual atmosphere. In contrast, mosques often aim for clarity, with domed ceilings and smooth plaster surfaces that reflect the human voice evenly throughout the space, ensuring that the call to prayer can be heard clearly by everyone present. The acoustic properties of a space can even affect how we perceive time. In a highly reverberant environment, where echoes linger and overlap, sounds seem to stretch out, and time can feel slower, more expansive. In a dry, acoustically dead space, like a recording studio lined with thick foam, sounds end abruptly, and time can feel more immediate, more precise. This is one reason why different environments evoke different emotional responses. A cathedral can make us feel contemplative, aware of something larger than ourselves, while a small, quiet room can feel intimate and focused. Echoes also play a role in how animals navigate and communicate. Bats are perhaps the most famous echolocators, using high-frequency calls that bounce off insects, trees, and other obstacles. A bat can emit calls at rates of up to 200 per second, and the echoes that return provide a detailed acoustic map of the environment. The bat's brain processes this information so quickly that it can adjust its flight path in real time, swooping and diving through cluttered environments with astonishing precision. Different species of bats use different frequencies and call patterns, adapted to their specific hunting strategies and habitats. Some use short, broadband clicks for close-range navigation, while others use longer, narrowband calls to detect prey at greater distances. Birds, too, use sound reflection in subtle ways. Some species that nest in caves, like the oilbird of South America, use a form of echolocation to navigate in complete darkness. Their clicks are much lower in frequency than those of bats, but they serve the same purpose, bouncing off cave walls and obstacles to help the birds find their way. Even birds that don't echolocate are sensitive to the acoustic properties of their environment. Songbirds choose perches that enhance the projection of their calls, often singing from high, exposed branches where sound can travel freely, or in dense foliage where the acoustic environment is more intimate, suitable for close-range communication. Insects, despite their small size, also interact with sound reflections in complex ways. Crickets, for instance, use specialized structures on their wings to produce their characteristic chirps, and they often position themselves in burrows or other small cavities that act as resonators, amplifying the sound. The shape and size of the cavity affect the frequency and volume of the chirp, and male crickets will sometimes adjust their position to optimize the acoustic output, making themselves more attractive to potential mates. This is a form of acoustic engineering on a tiny scale, a testament to how deeply sound and its reflections are woven into the fabric of life. Humans have also learned to use echoes for practical purposes beyond navigation. In some cultures, traditional methods of communication relied on echoes to send messages across long distances. In the mountains of the Canary Islands, for example, a whistled language called Silbo Gomero allowed people to communicate across valleys and ravines where shouting would have been ineffective. The whistles, with their high frequency and simple structure, could travel over a mile, and the echoes helped carry the sound even farther. This practice, which dates back centuries, is still taught in schools on the island of La Gomera, a living link to a time when acoustic knowledge was essential for survival. In a modern world, we've developed technologies that mimic and extend the natural phenomenon of echolocation. Sonar, which stand for sound navigation and ranging, uses sound waves to detect objects underwater. A sonar system emits a pulse of sound and listens for the echo, measuring the time it takes for the sound to return and using that information to calculate the distance to an object. This technology was developed during World War I for detecting submarines, but it has since found countless civilian applications, from mapping the ocean floor to locating schools of fish. The principles are the same as those used by dolphins and whales, though the technology is far less sophisticated than the biological systems that inspired it. Ultrasound imaging, used in medicine, is another application of sound reflection. High-frequency sound waves are directed into the body, and the echoes that bounce back from different tissues are used to create an image. Because different tissues have different densities, they reflect sound waves differently, allowing doctors to distinguish between organs, fluids, and other structures. This technology is safe and non-invasive, and it has become an essential tool in prenatal care, allowing expectant parents to see their developing baby long before birth. The images are built entirely from echoes, a testament to how much information can be encoded in the way sound reflects. In architecture, the study of acoustics has led to innovations that improve both sound quality and energy efficiency. Sound-absorbing materials, for instance, can reduce noise pollution in urban environments, making buildings quieter and more comfortable. These materials work by trapping sound waves in tiny pores or fibers, converting the acoustic energy into heat through friction. The result is a space where echoes are minimized and sounds decay quickly. This is especially important in open-plan offices, schools, and hospitals, where excessive noise can be stressful and distracting. By carefully managing reflections, Architects can create environments that support concentration, communication, and well-being. The speed of sound, which we touched on earlier, is not a constant. It changes depending on the medium through which it travels. In air at sea level and at a temperature of 20 degrees Celsius, sound travels at about 343 meters per second. But if the temperature rises, the air molecules move faster and sound travels more quickly. For every degree Celsius increase in temperature, the speed of sound in air increases by about 0.6 meters per second. This might seem like a small change, but over long distances, it can make a noticeable difference in the timing of echoes. In water, as we mentioned, sound travels much faster, about 1,500 meters per second. This is because water molecules are closer together than air molecules, allowing vibrations to pass more quickly from one molecule to the next. In solids, sound travels even faster. In steel, for instance, sound can travel at speeds of up to 6,000 meters per second. This is why you can sometimes hear a train coming by putting your ear to the rail long before you can hear it through the air. The sound travels through the solid metal much more quickly than through the air. The behavior of sound in different media has practical implications. In construction, for example, sound can travel through walls, floors, and ceilings, creating noise problems between rooms or apartments. This is called structure-borne sound, and it occurs when vibrations pass through solid materials rather than through the air. A footstep on a hard floor, for instance, creates vibrations that travel through the floor and into the structure of the building, where they can be heard in rooms below or even in adjacent units. To prevent this, builders use techniques like floating floors, where a layer of resilient material is placed between the floor and the structural subfloor, breaking the path of vibration and reducing the transmission of sound. In nature, the layering of different media creates complex acoustic environments. In a forest, sound might travel through the air, reflect off tree trunks, pass through leaves, and even travel through the ground. Each medium affects the sound differently, absorbing some frequencies, reflecting others, and creating a rich tapestry of acoustic information. Animals that rely on hearing to hunt or communicate have evolved to interpret these complex soundscapes, picking out the signals that matter and filtering out the rest. The shape of a reflecting surface also affects the quality of an echo. A flat, smooth surface produces a specular reflection, where the sound bounces off at the same angle it arrived, much like light reflecting off a mirror. But if the surface is curved, the reflection can be focused or dispersed. A concave surface, like the inside of a dome, can focus sound waves toward a single point, creating a focal point where sound is much louder than elsewhere. This is the principle behind whispering galleries, where a person standing at one point in a curved space can hear a whisper from someone standing far away at another specific point. The sound travels along the curved surface, reflecting repeatedly, and arrives at the listener's ear with surprising clarity. Convex surfaces, on the other hand, disperse sound, scattering reflections in many directions. This is often desirable in acoustic design, as it prevents echoes from being too strong or too focused in any one area. Many modern concert halls use convex panels on the walls and ceiling to create a diffuse sound field, where reflections arrive from many angles, enveloping the listener in a rich, spacious sound. The texture of a surface matters too. A rough surface, with irregularities on the scale of the sound's wavelength, will scatter sound in many directions, even if the overall shape is flat. This is called diffuse reflection, and it's an important tool in acoustic design. By using textured surfaces, architects can prevent strong echoes while still allowing some sound to reflect, maintaining a sense of liveliness in the space. This is why many performance venues have walls covered in decorative elements, panels, coffers, sculptures that break up the surface and scatter sound. In open landscapes, the ground itself can act as a reflecting surface. When sound travels close to the ground, some of it reflects off the surface and interferes with the direct sound, creating patterns of reinforcement and cancellation. This ground effect is most noticeable at low frequencies and over flat, hard surfaces like pavement or water. It's one reason why distant sounds can sometimes seem to fade in and out as you move. You're moving through areas where the direct and reflected sound waves are interfering constructively or destructively. Weather conditions also affect how sound reflects and travels. On a calm, clear night, sound can travel much farther than during the day because the air is cooler and often more stable. During the day, the sun heats the ground, creating turbulence in the air that scatters sound waves and reduces the distance they can travel. This is why distant sounds, a train, a highway, a neighbor's conversation, can seem much louder at night. The temperature gradient also plays a role. Normally, air temperature decreases with altitude, and sound waves traveling upward are refracted or bent upward and away from the ground. But at night, the ground cools faster than the air above it, creating a temperature inversion where cooler air is near the ground and warmer air is above. In this situation, sound waves are refracted downward, staying closer to the ground and traveling farther. Wind affects sound propagation as well. Sound traveling with the wind is carried farther, while sound traveling against the wind is slowed and refracted upward, reducing the distance it can travel. This is why it's easier to hear someone calling from downwind than from upwind. The effect is most pronounced over long distances, where even a gentle breeze can make a significant difference. Humidity, too, plays a role, though it's more subtle. Water vapor in the air absorbs sound, especially at higher frequencies. On a dry day, high frequency sounds like bird calls or the rustle of leaves can seem sharper and clearer. On a humid day, those same sounds are softer, more muted, as the water molecules absorb some of the acoustic energy. This is one reason why a rainforest, with its high humidity, can feel so acoustically dense. The air itself is absorbing sound, shortening the distance that sounds can travel and reducing the clarity of echoes. The Doppler effect, named after the Austrian physicist Christian Doppler, describes how the frequency of a sound changes when the source or the listener is moving. When a sound source moves toward you, the sound waves are compressed and the frequency increases, making the sound higher in pitch. When the source moves away, the waves are stretched and the frequency decreases, making the sound lower. You experience this every time an ambulance or train passes by. The pitch drops noticeably as it moves away. This effect applies to echoes as well. If you're moving toward a reflecting surface, the echo you hear will be slightly higher in pitch than the original sound. If you're moving away, it will be lower. The difference is usually small, but it's measurable, and it's one of the ways that animals using echolocation can determine not only the location of an object, but also whether it's moving toward or away from them. In some environments, multiple reflections can create standing waves, patterns of sound where certain frequencies are reinforced and others are canceled out. This happens most often in enclosed spaces with parallel walls, where sound waves bounce back and forth, interfering with themselves. If the distance between the walls is a multiple of half the wavelength of a particular frequency, that frequency will be reinforced, creating a resonance. This is why small rooms often have a boom quality at certain frequencies. The room itself is resonating, amplifying those frequencies while leaving others relatively unchanged. Acoustic engineers work to minimize this effect by using non-parallel walls, adding absorptive materials, or designing the room's dimensions to avoid simple ratios that would create strong resonances. In larger spaces like auditoriums or gymnasiums, the problem is often not resonance, but excessive reverberation. When sound reflects off hard surfaces many times, the echoes overlap and blur together, creating a wash of sound that makes speech difficult to understand and music sound muddy. The solution is to add absorptive materials, curtains, acoustic panels, carpeting, that soak up sound and reduce the number of reflections. The goal is to find a balance, enough reflections to give the space a sense of warmth and liveliness, but not so many that clarity is lost. The journey through sound continues now in places where reflection becomes something more intricate, more layered. We've walked through caves and concert halls, listened to bats and dolphins, felt the way temperature bends a sound wave's path. Now we turn toward the subtler architectures of echo, the places where sound doesn't simply bounce, but weaves, folds, and creates patterns that surprise even those who study them most carefully. There are rooms in the world designed not to echo at all. Anechoic chambers, they're called, and they represent one of the most unusual acoustic environments humans have ever created. The walls, ceiling, and floor are covered in wedges of foam or fiberglass, each wedge carefully angled to absorb sound rather than reflect it. When you stand inside one of these rooms, your voice doesn't return to you. It leaves your mouth and vanishes into the material around you, swallowed so completely that speaking feels strange, almost effortful. The silence isn't merely quiet. It's the absence of reflection, the removal of that constant, subtle companionship that echoes provide in every normal space. In such a chamber, you begin to hear sounds you've never noticed before. The rush of blood through vessels near your ears becomes audible. Your heartbeat, usually masked by ambient noise and reflected sound, emerges as a steady rhythm. Some people find the experience unsettling, but there's a peculiar peace in it too, a sense of being present with only the sounds your own body makes. These rooms are used to test microphones, speakers, and other audio equipment, providing an environment where no external reflections interfere with measurements. The quietest anechoic chamber ever built, located in Minnesota, reaches negative decibels when measured against human hearing thresholds, meaning it's quieter than the baseline of what we typically consider silence. The opposite extreme exists as well. Reverberation chambers are designed to reflect sound as much as possible, creating a space where echoes build upon echoes until the air seems thick with layered sound. The walls are hard, smooth, often made of concrete or tile, and arranged in non-parallel configurations to scatter sound in every direction. In such a room, a single hand clap can ring for several seconds, the sound bouncing thousands of times before finally fading. These chambers help engineers understand how products will sound in highly reflective environments, how a speaker will perform in a tiled bathroom or a marble lobby. Between these two extremes lies the entire spectrum of human acoustic experience. Every room you've ever been in falls somewhere on this continuum, from the muffled quiet of a carpeted bedroom to the lively brightness of a kitchen with hard counters and bare walls. Your brain processes these differences constantly, using the pattern of reflections to understand the size and character of the space around you, even in darkness. There's a particular kind of echo called a flutter echo, and it happens in spaces with two parallel reflective surfaces. If you clap your hands in a long hallway or between two flat walls, you might hear it, a rapid, fluttering repetition of the sound, almost like a zipper being pulled or a bird's wings beating. The sound bounces back and forth between the surfaces so quickly that the individual echoes blur together into this distinctive flutter. It's generally considered undesirable in architectural acoustics, something designers try to avoid by angling walls or adding absorptive materials. But there's something playful about it too, a reminder of how quickly sound can travel when given a simple, clear path. Some animals have evolved to use echoes in ways that seem almost magical in their precision. We've touched on bats and dolphins, but the oilbird of South America deserves its own consideration. These birds nest deep in caves, in darkness so complete that vision becomes useless. They've developed a form of echolocation less sophisticated than a bat's, but perfectly suited to their needs. The clicks they produce are audible to human ears, a steady series of sharp sounds that bounce off cave walls and allow the birds to navigate through winding passages to their nests. Unlike bats, which echolocate while hunting in open air, oilbirds use their ability primarily for navigation in enclosed spaces, a different application of the same principle. Swiftlets, small birds found in Southeast Asia, have developed similar abilities. They too nest in caves and use echolocation to navigate in darkness. Their clicks are slightly different from those of oilbirds, faster and higher in pitch, but the principle remains the same. What's remarkable is that these abilities evolved independently in different bird species on different continents, a case of convergent evolution where the same environmental challenge, navigating in darkness, led to the same solution, listening to echoes. Even some humans have learned to echolocate with remarkable skill. Individuals who are blind have sometimes developed the ability to make clicking sounds with their tongues and interpret the returning echoes to understand their surroundings. One man, Daniel Kish, became famous for his ability to ride a bicycle through streets and trails using only echolocation, clicking steadily as he moved and interpreting the reflections to avoid obstacles and follow paths. Brain scans of people who echolocate show that they process these sounds in the visual cortex, the part of the brain typically used for sight, suggesting that the brain is remarkably adaptable in how it builds spatial understanding. The speed at which the human brain processes echoes is worth contemplating. When you speak in a room, the direct sound reaches your ears first, followed milliseconds later by reflections from walls, ceiling, and floor. Your brain integrates all of these sounds into a single perception, using the pattern of reflections to understand the space without conscious effort. If the reflections arrive within about 30 milliseconds of the direct sound, you don't perceive them as separate echoes. They simply add richness and spaciousness to the sound. Beyond that threshold, echoes become distinct, and the clarity of speech begins to suffer. This is why large spaces with hard surfaces can be challenging for conversation. In a gymnasium or a train station, the reflections take longer to arrive and overlap with new sounds, creating a wash of noise that makes individual words harder to distinguish. Your brain, trying to separate direct sound from reflections, has to work harder, and the effort can be tiring. Acoustic designers address this by adding absorptive materials to reduce the strength of reflections, or by using shapes and surfaces that scatter sound in ways that prevent long, distinct echoes. There are places in the world where echoes behave in ways that seem impossible until you experience them. At the Temple of Kukulkan in Chichen Itza, a Mayan pyramid in Mexico, clapping your hands at the base of the staircase produces an echo that sounds remarkably like the chirp of a quetzal bird, a creature sacred to the Maya. The echo is created by the way sound reflects off the step structure of the pyramid, each step contributing a slightly delayed reflection that combines to create this distinctive chirping sound. Whether this was intentional, a deliberate acoustic design by Mayan architects, or simply a fortunate accident remains a subject of debate, but the effect is undeniable and deeply evocative. In the ancient city of Epidaurus in Greece, the theater we mentioned earlier has another acoustic peculiarity beyond its exceptional clarity. If you sit in the back row and listen carefully, you can hear the rustle of paper or the scrape of a foot on the stage below with startling clarity, yet the ambient noise of wind and distant traffic seems muted. Researchers have discovered that the limestone seats act as acoustic filters, dampening low-frequency background noise while allowing the higher frequencies of human speech and small sounds to travel clearly. The ancient builders, whether through understanding or experimentation, created a space that naturally filters out the sounds you don't want to hear while preserving those you do. Whispering galleries represent another acoustic curiosity. These are circular or elliptical rooms where a whisper, spoken facing the wall at one point, can be heard clearly at another point far across the room. The dome of St. Paul's Cathedral in London is perhaps the most famous example. Sound waves travel along the curved surface of the wall, reflecting continuously inward, so they don't disperse into the room, but instead follow the curve until they reach the listener. Standing in the right spot, you can hear a whisper from 100 feet away, as if the person were standing beside you. It's an intimate, almost secret form of communication, made possible entirely by geometry and reflection. The physics underlying whispering galleries involves the principle of curved reflectors focusing sound. Just as a parabolic mirror can focus light to a point, a curved surface can focus sound. In a perfect circle or ellipse, sound waves emanate from one focal point, reflect off the curved wall, and converge at another focal point. The effect requires smooth, hard surfaces and the right geometry. But when conditions align, it creates this remarkable phenomenon where sound seems to travel impossibly far without losing strength. Musical instruments themselves are carefully designed systems of reflection and resonance. The body of a guitar or violin is a chamber where sound waves reflect and reinforce each other, amplifying the vibrations of the strings. The shape, size, and material of the body all affect which frequencies are enhanced and which are dampened. A Stradivarius violin, made by Antonio Stradivari in the 17th and 18th centuries, is prized partly for its exceptional acoustic properties, the result of wood selection, varnish composition, and construction techniques that create a particular pattern of internal reflections. The soundboard of a piano, that large wooden panel beneath the strings, acts as a reflector and amplifier. When a hammer strikes a string, the string alone would produce only a faint sound, but the vibration travels through the bridge to the soundboard, which has a much larger surface area and pushes more air, creating a louder sound. The soundboard also reflects and reinforces certain frequencies based on its own resonant properties, contributing to the instrument's tonal character. Every piano sounds slightly different because the exact pattern of reflections and resonances within its structure is unique. Brass instruments like trumpets and trombones use the reflection of sound within a tube to create standing waves, patterns where the wave reflects back and forth in such a way that certain points along the tube always have maximum vibration, while others remain still. By changing the length of the tube, either with valves or a slide, the player changes which frequencies form standing waves, and thus which notes sound. The bell at the end of the instrument isn't just decorative. It's carefully shaped to reflect some frequencies back into the tube, while allowing others to radiate outward, shaping the instrument's tone. Organ pipes work on similar principles. Each pipe is a tube, open or closed at one end, and sound reflects within it to create standing waves. The length of the pipe determines the fundamental frequency, the lowest note it produces, but reflections also create overtones, higher frequencies that give the organ its characteristic rich sound. A large organ might have thousands of pipes, each carefully tuned, and the reflections within a cathedral or concert hall add further complexity, blending the direct sound from the pipes with echoes from stone walls and vaulted ceilings. There's something meditative about considering how much of music is simply organized reflection. The resonance of a string, the amplification of a soundboard, the standing waves in a pipe, the echoes in a concert hall. All of these are sound waves reflecting, interfering, reinforcing, and creating the textures we perceive as music. When you listen to an orchestra, you're hearing not just the instruments, but the entire acoustic environment, the way the hall shapes and colors the sound through countless reflections. Recording studios are designed with careful attention to reflection. Isolation booths have absorptive walls to minimize reflections, allowing engineers to capture a dry sound that can be shaped later with artificial reverb. Larger live rooms have carefully calibrated reflections, enough to add warmth and space to the recording, but not so much that clarity is lost. The placement of microphones takes reflection into account, positioning them to capture the right balance of direct sound and room ambience. Artificial reverb, created electronically, simulates the pattern of reflections in a physical space. Early reverb units used metal plates or springs, sending sound vibrations through these materials and capturing the complex reflections that resulted. Digital reverb analyzes the pattern of reflections in real or imagined spaces and recreates them mathematically, allowing a recording made in a dry studio to sound as if it were performed in a cathedral, a small jazz club, or an open canyon. The illusion works because our brains interpret patterns of reflections as indicators of space, and if the pattern is convincing, we perceive the space as real. The study of room acoustics became a formal science in the late 19th century, largely through the work of Wallace Sabine, a physicist at Harvard University. Sabine was asked to improve the terrible acoustics of a lecture hall, and through systematic experimentation, he developed the first mathematical formulas relating room size, surface materials, and reverberation time. His work laid the foundation for modern architectural acoustics, allowing designers to predict how a space will sound before it's built and to make adjustments to achieve desired acoustic qualities. Sabine's key insight was that reverberation time, the time it takes for a sound to decay to inaudibility, depends on the volume of the room and the total absorption of its surfaces. A large room with hard surfaces has a long reverberation time, while a small room with soft surfaces has a short one. By calculating the absorption coefficients of different materials, how much sound they absorb versus reflect, and knowing the room's dimensions, designers can predict and control reverberation. This might seem dry, but it represents a profound understanding that the behavior of echoes can be quantified, predicted, and shaped to human purposes. Different activities require different acoustic environments. A lecture hall needs clarity, so reverberation time should be short, around 1 second or less, ensuring that each word is distinct. A concert hall for orchestral music benefits from longer reverberation, around 2 seconds, which blends notes together and adds warmth and richness. A recording studio for popular music might aim for even shorter reverberation, creating a tight, controlled sound. Churches often have long reverberation times, 3 seconds or more, which enhances the sense of grandeur and makes choral music sound ethereal and enveloping. The materials used in construction profoundly affect these qualities. Carpet, curtains, and upholstered furniture absorb sound, shortening reverberation. Wood, plaster, and concrete reflect sound to varying degrees depending on their finish and thickness. Glass is highly reflective, which is why rooms with large windows can sound bright and lively. Acoustic tiles, with their porous surfaces and sometimes perforated faces, are designed specifically to absorb sound and are common in offices and schools where controlling noise is important. Even the presence of people changes a room's acoustics. Human bodies, with their soft tissues and clothing, absorb sound. An empty concert hall sounds different from a full one, often brighter and more reverberant when empty. Designers account for this by testing acoustics with the expected audience in place or by using absorption coefficients that represent occupied seating. It's a reminder that acoustics are dynamic, changing with conditions and occupancy. Some modern concert halls use adjustable acoustics, mechanical systems that can change the room's reverberation time. Curtains can be drawn or retracted. Panels can be rotated to expose absorptive or reflective surfaces, and even the ceiling height can be adjusted in some designs. This allows a single hall to serve multiple purposes, providing the clarity needed for a lecture or the warmth needed for a symphony, all through controlling reflection. There's a particular beauty in outdoor acoustics, where natural features create reflections without walls or ceilings. A cliff face can reflect sound back across a valley, creating echoes that travel for miles. In the right conditions, you can shout into a canyon and hear your voice return seconds later. The delay, a direct measured distance. The echo has traveled to the far wall and back, and knowing the speed of sound, you can calculate how far away that wall is. It's a simple form of ranging, the same principle used in sonar and echolocation, available to anyone with a voice and an open space. Mountain ranges create complex acoustic environments where sound can reflect multiple times, bouncing from peak to peak. Climbers sometimes report hearing voices or sounds that seem to come from impossible directions, the result of reflections off rock faces and the way wind and temperature gradients bend sound waves. In these environments, echoes become part of the landscape, as much a feature of the place as the stone and snow. Deserts, with their vast open spaces and occasional rock formations, offer their own acoustic experiences. The silence of a desert is profound, with little vegetation to absorb sound and often little wind to create noise. When sound does occur, it carries far, and reflections from distant mesas or canyon walls can create echoes that seem to come from the sky itself. The clarity of sound in dry air, with low humidity and few particles to scatter waves, makes every sound sharp and distinct. Forests, as we've touched on before, are acoustically absorptive, but their structure creates interesting effects. Sound can travel farther parallel to the ground, channeled between the earth and the canopy, than it does upward or downward. This creates a kind of acoustic horizon, beyond which sounds fade quickly. Animals in forests have adapted their vocalizations to these conditions, using frequencies and patterns that propagate well through the layered, absorptive environment. Wetlands and marshes, with their mix of water, reeds, and soft ground, absorb sound readily. These are quiet places where sounds seem muffled and echoes are rare. The acoustic environment contributes to the sense of stillness and secrecy that wetlands often evoke. Birds in these environments tend to use calls that are loud and relatively low in frequency, sounds that carry better through the absorptive vegetation. Ice and snow dramatically change acoustic environments. Fresh snow is highly absorptive, its porous structure trapping sound waves and preventing reflection. A landscape covered in new snow feels quieter, sounds muffled and close. Ice, by contrast, is reflective, and frozen lakes or glaciers can carry sound long distances across their smooth surfaces. The cracking and groaning of ice, as it expands and contracts with temperature changes, creates sounds that reflect across frozen expanses, sometimes traveling for miles. The ocean itself is an acoustic environment we rarely consider from the inside. Underwater, sound travels faster than in air, about 4 times faster, and it can travel immense distances. The deep ocean has channels where temperature and pressure create conditions that refract sound waves, bending them back toward the channel and allowing them to propagate for thousands of miles with little loss. Whales use these channels to communicate across ocean basins, their songs reflecting and refracting through the water, reaching other whales on the far side of the sea. Underwater echoes are used extensively by submarines and ships for navigation and detection. Sonar, which we've discussed, sends out pulses of sound and listens for reflection from the seafloor, other vessels, or underwater obstacles. The time delay of the echo indicates distance, and the character of the reflection can reveal something about the object's size, shape, and material. It's a way of seeing with sound, building a picture of the underwater world through reflected waves. Marine animals have been using these principles far longer than humans. Dolphins and toothed whales echolocate with astonishing precision, able to distinguish between different species of fish, detect objects buried in sand, and navigate through murky water where vision is useless. Their brains process the returning echoes to create a detailed acoustic image of their surroundings, a sense that's difficult for us to fully imagine, but clearly rivals vision in its richness and utility. The clicks that dolphins produce for echolocation are directional, focused forward by the melon, a fatty organ in the forehead that acts as an acoustic lens. This allows them to aim their sonar, scanning the environment much as we might sweep a flashlight beam across a dark room. The returning echoes are received through the lower jaw, which conducts sound to the inner ear, and the brain processes these signals with remarkable speed, updating the acoustic image continuously as the dolphin moves. Sperm whales produce the loudest sounds of any animal, clicks that can exceed 230 decibels. These sounds are used for echolocation as the whales hunt squid in the deep ocean, often at depths where no light penetrates. The clicks are so powerful that they can stun prey, a use of sound that goes beyond sensing to become a weapon. The echoes returning from these clicks allow the whale to locate squid in the vast darkness, a feat of acoustic perception that spans hundreds of meters. The structure of a sperm whale's head is adapted for sound production and focusing. The spermaceti organ, a large structure filled with waxy oil, is thought to play a role in generating and directing these powerful clicks. The exact mechanism is still debated, but it's clear that the whale's head is an elaborate acoustic instrument, shaped by millions of years of evolution to produce and control sound in water. Bats, returning to the air, have diversified their echolocation strategies to suit different hunting styles and environments. Some bats use frequency-modulated calls, sweeping rapidly from high to low frequency, which provides detailed information about distance and the texture of objects. Others use constant frequency calls, which are better for detecting the motion of prey, as the Doppler shift of the returning echo reveals the target's speed and direction. Each strategy has advantages, and different bat species have evolved calls suited to their particular ecological niches. Horseshoe bats, for instance, use long, constant frequency calls and have evolved highly specialized ears and brain structures to detect the tiny Doppler shifts caused by the wing beats of flying insects. They can pick out a single moth from the clutter of echoes reflecting off leaves and branches, a task that requires extraordinary auditory processing. The moth, for its part, has evolved ears sensitive to bat calls and will dive or take evasive action when it detects the ultrasonic clicks, an evolutionary arms race played out in sound. Some moths have even evolved the ability to produce their own ultrasonic clicks, which can jam a bat's sonar or signal that the moth is unpalatable, a warning similar to the bright colors of poisonous insects. This acoustic interaction between predator and prey is a reminder that sound and its reflections are not just passive phenomena, but active elements in the struggle for survival. Human-made environments create their own acoustic ecologies. Cities are loud, filled with the sounds of traffic, construction, and countless human activities, and these sounds reflect off buildings, pavement, and other hard surfaces, creating a dense acoustic texture. Urban soundscapes are often characterized by long reverberation times and high levels of background noise, which can be stressful and fatiguing. Urban planners and architects are increasingly considering acoustics in city design, using vegetation, water features, and building materials to shape sound and create quieter, more pleasant environments. Green walls and roofs, covered with plants, absorb sound and reduce reflections, softening the acoustic harshness of urban spaces. Water features, like fountains, create masking noise that can cover less pleasant sounds like traffic, a technique used in landscape design to improve the perceived acoustic environment. Even the layout of streets and buildings affects how sound propagates, with narrow streets and tall buildings creating urban canyons where sound reflects repeatedly, amplifying noise levels. Inside buildings, the trend toward open-plan offices has created acoustic challenges. Without walls to block and absorb sound, conversations, and office equipment create a constant background noise that can reduce productivity and increase stress. Designers address this with ceiling baffles, sound-absorbing panels, and careful space planning, trying to balance openness with acoustic comfort. It's a reminder that the spaces we create shape our experience in subtle but significant ways, and sound is a crucial part of that shaping. Libraries, traditionally quiet spaces, are designed with acoustics in mind. High ceilings, soft furnishings, and sound-absorbing materials keep noise levels low and prevent echoes that would disturb concentration. The quiet of a library is not accidental, but the result of careful design, creating an environment where the primary sounds are the rustle of pages and the soft footfalls of patrons, sounds that themselves are quickly absorbed. Hospitals also require careful acoustic design. Noise in hospitals can impede healing, disrupt sleep, and increase stress for patients and staff. Modern hospital design incorporates sound-absorbing ceiling tiles, quieter equipment, and layouts that separate noisy areas from patient rooms. The goal is to create an environment where the acoustic experience supports rest and recovery, where echoes and reflections are controlled to minimize disturbance. Theaters and cinemas, beyond their obvious need for good acoustics, also use sound reflection creatively. Surround sound systems place speakers around the audience, and the reflections off walls and ceiling help create an immersive experience, making it seem as though sound is coming from all directions. The design of the room, its shape and surface materials, affects how well this illusion works. A good cinema balances direct sound from speakers with controlled reflections that enhance spaciousness without muddying clarity. Recording studios for film and television often include Foley stages, rooms where sound effects are created and recorded. These rooms have carefully controlled acoustics, allowing Foley artists to produce sounds that match the visual action on screen. The acoustic character of the Foley stage can be adjusted with movable panels and different floor surfaces, allowing the creation of sounds that seem to come from a variety of environments, all through controlling reflection and absorption. The voice itself is an instrument shaped by reflection. The vocal tract, the space from the vocal cords to the lips, acts as a resonant chamber where sound reflects and certain frequencies are amplified. The shape of this chamber, changed by moving the tongue, lips, and jaw, determines which frequencies are enhanced, and thus which vowel sound is produced. Consonants are created by interrupting or constricting the airflow, but the resonances of the vocal tract give speech its characteristic timbre. Singers train to use these resonances effectively, shaping the vocal tract to enhance desirable frequencies and project sound. The phenomenon of singing in the shower, where your voice sounds richer and more powerful, is due to the hard, reflective surfaces of the bathroom creating strong echoes and reinforcing certain frequencies. The small size of the room means reflections return quickly, adding fullness without becoming distinct echoes, and many people find their voice sounds best in this environment. Professional singers perform in spaces ranging from intimate clubs to vast opera houses, and each space requires adjustments and technique. In a large hall, a singer must project sound to reach the back rows, using resonance and breath support to create a powerful tone that carries over distance. The reflections in the hall help, blending and amplifying the voice, but the singer must still produce enough direct sound to be heard clearly. In a small space, less power is needed, and the singer can focus on subtlety and nuance, knowing that every detail will be audible. The human ear is remarkably sensitive to the timing of reflections. We can detect differences in arrival time of just a few microseconds, and our brains use this information to localize sound sources. When a sound comes from the right, it reaches the right ear slightly before the left, and this tiny time difference is enough for the brain to determine direction. Reflections add complexity to this process, but the brain is adept at separating direct sound from echoes, focusing on the first arrival to determine where a sound originated. This ability is part of what's called the precedence effect or Haas effect. When a sound and its reflection arrive within a short time window, we perceive them as a single sound coming from the direction of the first arrival. This allows us to localize sound sources even in reverberant environments, ignoring the confusing information from echoes. It's a sophisticated form of auditory processing, one that happens automatically and allows us to navigate complex acoustic environments with ease. The way sound moves through ice carries its own particular wonder. In glaciers and ice sheets, sound waves travel with unusual clarity and speed. The crystalline structure of ice, when compressed over centuries, becomes remarkably uniform and dense. This density allows sound to propagate faster than in liquid water, reaching speeds of nearly 4 kilometers per second in some polarized formations. When researchers place hydrophones beneath Antarctic ice shelves, they hear the groans and cracks of glacial movement, sounds that have traveled through ice for kilometers, arriving sharp and clear despite the distance. The phenomenon of acoustic streaming reveals how sound itself can create motion in the medium it travels through. When intense sound waves pass through air or water, they don't just vibrate the molecules, they can actually push them in one direction, creating a steady flow. This effect becomes visible in laboratory demonstrations where sound waves levitate small particles or create swirling patterns in smoke. The acoustic radiation pressure, though tiny for everyday sounds, becomes substantial at high intensities. Ultrasound devices use this principle to clean delicate instruments, the sound waves creating microscopic currents that dislodge particles without physical contact. In the realm of architectural acoustics, the concept of early reflections shapes how we perceive the size and character of a space. The first few reflections that reach our ears within about 50 milliseconds of the direct sound don't register as separate echoes. Instead, our brain integrates them with the original sound, using the timing and intensity of these early reflections to judge the room's dimensions and the materials around us. A voice in a small bathroom sounds different from the same voice in a cathedral, partly because of how these early reflections arrive. The bathroom's close walls send reflections back within milliseconds, creating a sense of enclosure. The cathedral's distant surfaces delay those reflections, and our perception expands to match. The acoustic properties of fog create a soundscape unlike any other atmospheric condition. Water droplets suspended in air scatter sound waves, particularly at higher frequencies. This scattering causes sound to decay more rapidly with distance in fog than in clear air. Foghorns are designed with this in mind, using low frequencies that penetrate fog more effectively than higher tones would. The traditional mournful sound of a foghorn isn't just aesthetic, it's acoustically practical. Those deep tones, typically between 100 and 300 Hz, suffer less scattering from water droplets and could travel farther through heavy fog than any higher-pitch warning could. Standing waves in rooms create zones of reinforcement and cancellation that remain fixed in space. When sound reflects back and forth between parallel walls at particular frequencies, the incident and reflected waves can align to create patterns where some locations experience amplified sound, while others fall into relative silence. These standing wave patterns depend on the wavelength of the sound and the distance between reflective surfaces. In a room where opposite walls are 5 meters apart, standing waves form most prominently at frequencies whose wavelengths divide evenly into 10 meters, the round-trip distance. Musicians and audio engineers become familiar with these room modes, learning which frequencies will boom unnaturally and which might disappear depending on where the listener stands. The acoustic phenomenon called the Haas effect, or precedence effect, explains why we can localize sound sources even in reflective environments. When a sound and its reflection arrive at our ears within about 35 milliseconds of each other, We perceive them as a single sound coming from the direction of the first arrival. The later reflection doesn't confuse our directional sense. It simply adds to the perceived loudness and spaciousness. This effect allows us to have conversations in moderately reflective rooms without becoming disoriented by echoes. Our auditory system automatically prioritizes the first sound that arrives, assigning it directional importance while treating subsequent reflections as ambience. Acoustic holography represents a sophisticated method of visualizing sound fields in 3 dimensions. By measuring sound pressure at many points around a source, computers can reconstruct the entire sound field, showing not just where sound is loud or quiet, but how waves interfere, reflect, and propagate through space. This technology helps engineers identify noise sources in machinery, optimize loudspeaker designs, and understand how sound behaves in complex environments. The resulting visualizations resemble shimmering, 3-dimensional maps, where colors represent pressure levels and patterns reveal the intricate dance of reflecting and interfering waves. The speed of sound in different gases varies dramatically based on molecular weight and temperature. In helium, sound travels nearly 3 times faster than in air because helium molecules are much lighter and respond more quickly to pressure changes. This is why breathing helium raises the pitch of your voice. It's not that your vocal cords vibrate faster, but that the resonant frequencies of your vocal tract shift upward as sound waves race through the lighter gas. In sulfur hexafluoride, which is much denser than air, the opposite occurs. Sound creeps along at less than half its normal speed, and voices drop to an eerie, deep register as vocal tract resonances shift downward. The acoustic properties of snow change dramatically as it ages and compacts. Fresh, fluffy snow contains countless tiny air pockets between delicate ice crystals. These pockets absorb sound energy efficiently, making freshly snow-covered landscapes remarkably quiet. The intricate structure of new snow crystals creates many surfaces where sound waves lose energy through multiple reflections and conversions to heat. As snow ages, crystals bond together and air pockets shrink. The snow becomes denser and more reflective. Old, compacted snow returns more sound energy, and the muffled quality of fresh snowfall gradually gives way to a more acoustically lively environment. Acoustic levitation uses standing waves to suspend objects in mid-air without any physical support. By creating a standing wave between a sound source and a reflector, researchers establish zones of high and low pressure that remain stationary in space. Small objects placed at pressure nodes, points where pressure oscillations cancel, experience forces that counteract gravity. The object hovers, held in place by acoustic radiation pressure from all sides. This phenomenon works best with ultrasonic frequencies, which creates standing wave patterns with nodes spaced closely enough to trap small objects. Scientists use acoustic levitation to study material properties without container interference, allowing substances to float freely while being heated, mixed, or analyzed. The reflection of sound from curved surfaces follows principles similar to curved mirrors in optics, but with important differences due to wavelength. A parabolic reflector focuses sound waves to a point, just as a parabolic mirror focuses light. However, because sound wavelengths are much longer than light wavelengths, acoustic focusing is less precise. A parabolic dish designed to focus sound at a particular frequency will work well for that frequency and its harmonics, but sounds with longer wavelengths will focus beyond the intended point, and shorter wavelengths will focus before it. This wavelength-dependent focusing creates challenges in designing acoustic reflectors, but also enables frequency-selective focusing in some applications. The acoustic properties of textiles and fabrics depend on their weave, thickness, and the air spaces within them. Heavy velvet curtains absorb sound effectively because sound waves penetrate the fabric and lose energy as they navigate the complex paths between fibers. The air trapped within and behind the fabric acts as a viscous medium, where sound energy converts to heat through friction. Lighter fabrics with tighter weaves reflect more sound, while thick, loosely woven materials with irregular surfaces scatter and absorb across a broader range of frequencies. Theater designers have known for centuries that heavy drapes improve acoustics by controlling reflections, and modern acousticians can now predict exactly how much absorption different fabrics will provide at each frequency. Acoustic mirrors, large concrete structures built in Britain before World War II, represent an ambitious attempt to detect approaching aircraft by sound alone. These curved walls, some over 20 feet tall, were designed to collect and focus the sound of airplane engines toward a listening position. The largest acoustic mirror could detect aircraft at distances of 15 to 20 miles under ideal conditions. Though radar soon made them obsolete, these structures still stand along the British coast, silent monuments to acoustic engineering. Their parabolic and elliptical shapes demonstrate the same focusing principles that modern satellite dishes use for electromagnetic waves, translated into the realm of sound. The acoustic environment inside a car changes dramatically with speed due to wind noise, tire sounds, and engine vibrations. At highway speeds, the acoustic energy inside a vehicle comes primarily from turbulent air flowing around mirrors, windows, and body panels. This broadband noise masks conversation and music, forcing occupants to raise their voices or turn up audio systems. Automotive engineers use wind tunnels and acoustic cameras to identify where turbulent air creates noise, then modify body shapes and add seals to reduce these sources. The difference between a quiet luxury car and a noisy economy model often comes down to hundreds of small acoustic improvements: better door seals, acoustic glass, strategic placement of sound-absorbing materials, and body designs that reduce turbulence. The principle of reciprocity in acoustic states that if you can hear someone from position A when they speak from position B, they can hear you equally well from position B when you speak from position A. This seemingly obvious principle has profound implications for acoustic design and measurement. It means that the acoustic path between 2 points has the same properties in both directions, regardless of the complexity of reflections, diffractions, and absorptions along the way. Reciprocity allows engineers to measure room acoustics from the listener's position using a loudspeaker on stage, knowing the results will accurately represent what a performer on stage would project to that listener. Acoustic metamaterials represent a new frontier in controlling sound reflection and transmission. These artificially structured materials have properties not found in nature, including negative acoustic refractive indices and frequency-dependent behavior that can be precisely engineered. Some acoustic metamaterials can bend sound waves around objects, creating acoustic cloaking effects where sound appears to pass through a space as if nothing were there. Others can focus sound beyond the normal diffraction limit or absorb specific frequencies with remarkable efficiency despite being thinner than traditional absorbers. These materials work by creating resonant structures at scales smaller than the wavelength of sound, allowing them to interact with sound waves in ways that homogeneous materials cannot. The acoustic properties of bone allow sound to reach our inner ears through paths other than the ear canal. Bone conduction occurs when vibrations travel through the skull directly to the cochlea, bypassing the outer and middle ear entirely. This is why your voice sounds different to you than it does in recordings. You hear your own voice partly through bone conduction, which emphasizes lower frequencies, while others hear only the airborne sound. Bone conduction headphones use this principle, placing transducers against the skull to transmit sound while leaving the ears open to environmental sounds. This technology helps people with certain types of hearing loss and allows workers to hear both audio communications and their surroundings simultaneously. The reflection of sound in forests creates a distinctive acoustic signature that changes with the seasons. In summer, when trees are fully leafed, sound reflects from a complex, irregular surface of leaves, branches, and trunks at varying distances. High frequencies scatter in all directions, absorbed by foliage, while lower frequencies penetrate deeper into the forest. In winter, when deciduous trees are bare, sound travels farther and reflects more predictably from trunks and the ground. The acoustic difference between summer and winter forests is so pronounced that experienced naturalists can estimate the season from acoustic characteristics alone. Birds and other forest animals adjust their vocalization seasonally, using frequencies that propagate most effectively through the current acoustic environment. Acoustic daylight imaging uses ambient noise rather than transmitted signals to create images of the subsurface. Traditional sonar sends out a pulse and listens for echoes, but acoustic daylight imaging passively listens to the natural sound field created by wind, waves, and marine life. By analyzing how this ambient noise reflects and refracts through underwater structures, the technique creates images without adding any sound to the environment. This approach is particularly valuable for monitoring marine mammals, which can be disturbed by active sonar, and for military applications where remaining acoustically silent is crucial. The method requires sophisticated signal processing to extract coherent information from seemingly random noise, but it demonstrates that sound reflections contain information even when we haven't deliberately created the sound. The acoustic properties of amphitheaters in ancient Greece achieved remarkable clarity through careful attention to geometry and materials. The theater at Epidaurus, built in the 4th century BCE, allows a whisper on stage to be heard clearly in the back row, 50 meters away. Recent research suggests that the limestone seats act as acoustic filters, suppressing low-frequency background noise while allowing higher-frequency speech to pass. The rows of seats create a corrugated surface that scatters sound in ways that reduce reflections back toward the stage, minimizing acoustic feedback. The semicircular shape focuses sound toward the audience, while the open-air design prevents the buildup of reverberant energy. These ancient builders understood acoustic principles so well that modern amphitheaters often perform worse despite advanced engineering. The acoustic phenomenon of beats occurs when two sounds of slightly different frequencies play simultaneously. The waves alternately reinforce and cancel each other as they drift in and out of phase, creating a periodic variation in loudness called beating. The beat frequency equals the difference between the two original frequencies. If one tone is at 440 Hz and another at 443 Hz, you'll hear a warbling at 3 beats per second. Musicians use this effect to tune instruments, adjusting strings or pipes until the beats slow and disappear, indicating perfect unison. The phenomenon demonstrates wave interference in its most accessible form, making the abstract concept of phase relationship audible and concrete. Acoustic thermometry uses the speed of sound to measure temperature across large distances. Since sound speed in water increases by about 4 meters per second for each degree Celsius of warming, precisely measuring how long sound takes to travel between 2 points reveals the average temperature along that path. Scientists have used acoustic thermometry to measure ocean temperatures across entire basins, transmitting low-frequency sounds that travel thousands of kilometers. The technique provides temperature data averaged over vast volumes of water, complementing point measurements from buoys and ships. As oceans warm due to climate change, acoustic thermometry offers a way to monitor temperature changes at scales that would be impractical with traditional methods. The acoustic properties of ice crystals and clouds affect how sound propagates through the atmosphere at high altitudes. Ice crystals scatter sound waves, particularly at frequencies where the wavelength is comparable to crystal dimensions. This scattering creates acoustic conditions in clouds that differ from clear air, affecting everything from aircraft noise to thunder propagation. The shape of ice crystals, plates, columns, dendrites, influences the scattering pattern, with complex crystals creating more diffuse scattering than simple shapes. Atmospheric scientists studying how sound moves through clouds gain insights into crystal populations and cloud microphysics, linking acoustic measurements to weather and climate processes. The reflection of sound from the ocean surface creates a mirror image that affects underwater acoustics profoundly. The surface acts as a nearly perfect reflector for sound traveling upward from below, but it's a dynamic, moving reflector. Waves and ripples create a constantly shifting acoustic mirror that can focus and defocus sound, creating flickering patterns of loudness called caustics. These caustics appear as bright lines that dance across the seafloor when sunlight reflects from surface waves. But the same phenomenon occurs with sound. Submarines and marine mammals must navigate an acoustic environment where sound paths bounce between the surface and bottom, creating complex patterns of zones where sound focuses and zones of acoustic shadow. Acoustic streaming in the inner ear helps protect delicate hair cells from damage. The intense sound waves that occur during loud noise exposure can create steady flows in the fluid-filled cochlea. These flows distribute acoustic energy more broadly, reducing the peak stress on any single location. While this protective mechanism helps, it's not sufficient to prevent damage from very loud or prolonged noise exposure. The phenomenon illustrates how sound isn't just pressure waves. At sufficient intensity, it creates actual fluid motion, with all the mechanical consequences that follow. The acoustic properties of coral reefs create distinctive soundscapes that marine larvae use for navigation. Healthy reefs produce a crackling, popping chorus from snapping shrimp, feeding fish, and other biological activity. This reef sound propagates through the ocean, creating an acoustic beacon that can be detected kilometers away. Larval fish and invertebrates, drifting in open water, use these acoustic cues to orient towards suitable settlement habitat. As reefs degrade, their acoustic signature diminishes, potentially affecting larval recruitment. Scientists now use underwater recordings to assess reef health, recognizing that acoustic vitality reflects biological vitality. The soundscape of a reef, shaped by countless sound sources and reflections from complex coral structures, serves as both an ecological indicator and a navigational beacon. The reflection of ultrasound and medical imaging depends on acoustic impedance differences between tissues. Acoustic impedance, the product of density and sound speed, determines how much sound reflects at boundaries. When ultrasound encounters a boundary between tissues with different impedances, muscle and bone, for example, some energy reflects back toward the transducer while the rest continues forward. The greater the impedance mismatch, the stronger the reflection. Air-filled spaces reflect ultrasound almost completely because of the enormous impedance difference between air and tissue, which is why gel is used to exclude air between the transducer and skin. The pattern of reflections from various tissue boundaries builds up the image, with computer processing translating reflection, timing, and intensity into spatial information. Acoustic radiation force, the pressure that sound waves exert on objects, becomes significant at high intensities. This force can move particles, deform soft tissues, and even propel small objects. In medical applications, focused ultrasound uses acoustic radiation force to break up kidney stones or temporarily open the blood-brain barrier for drug delivery. The force arises because sound waves carry momentum, and when that momentum transfers to an object, through reflection, absorption, or scattering, the object experiences a push. At everyday sound levels, this force is negligible, but at the intensities used in industrial and medical ultrasound, it becomes a useful tool for manipulation and therapy. The acoustic properties of different wood species affect their suitability for musical instruments. Spruce, with its high stiffness-to-weight ratio, efficiently transmits vibrations and is prized for soundboards and pianos and guitars. The grain structure of wood creates directional acoustic properties. Sound travels faster along the grain than across it. Instrument makers select wood not just for strength and workability, but for how it will shape the instrument's voice. The acoustic signature of a Stradivarius violin comes partly from the specific spruce and maple used in its construction. Wood that grew in the cooler climate of the Little Ice Age and developed particular density and resonance properties. Every piece of wood has its own acoustic character, determined by growth conditions, age, and species. The principle of diffraction allows sound to bend around obstacles and through openings, unlike light in everyday experience. When sound waves encounter an obstacle comparable to or smaller than their wavelength, they wrap around it, filling in what would otherwise be an acoustic shadow. This is why you can hear someone calling from around a corner, even when you can't see them. Low-frequency sounds, with wavelengths of several meters, diffract around most objects easily. High-frequency sounds, with wavelengths of centimeters, cast more defined acoustic shadows. Acoustic designers use diffraction to their advantage, creating barriers that block high frequencies while allowing low frequencies to pass, or designing spaces where sound bends around architectural elements to reach all listeners. The acoustic environment of a recording studio requires careful balance between absorption and reflection. Too much absorption creates a dead space where sound lacks life and energy. Too much reflection creates confusion and masks detail. Professional studios often include variable acoustics, movable panels, adjustable curtains, and repositionable baffles that allow engineers to tune the room's acoustic character to suit different instruments and recording styles. A drum kit might sound best with some lively reflections that add punch and ambience, while a solo voice might need a drier environment that captures intimacy. The art of studio design lies in creating flexible acoustic spaces that can be adjusted to serve different musical needs. Acoustic particle velocity, distinct from sound pressure, measures the actual back and forth motion of air molecules as sound passes. While sound pressure represents the compression and rarefaction of air, particle velocity describes how fast the air moves. These two quantities are related, but not identical, and measuring both provides more complete information about the sound field. Specialized microphones called particle velocity sensors detect this motion directly, enabling applications like determining the direction of a sound source or measuring acoustic intensity. The relationship between pressure and velocity changes near sound sources and boundaries, making combined measurements particularly valuable in complex acoustic environments. The acoustic properties of desert landscapes create conditions where sound can travel remarkable distances with little absorption. The dry air contains minimal water vapor, which would otherwise absorb high frequencies. The sparse vegetation provides few obstacles to scatter or absorb sound. The often flat terrain creates conditions where sound can propagate for kilometers with only geometric spreading to reduce its intensity. Desert dwellers have long known that conversations can be overheard at surprising distances, and that the approach of vehicles can be heard long before they're visible. The acoustic clarity of deserts stands in stark contrast to the muffled, absorbed quality of humid forests or urban environments. Acoustic intensity, measured in watts per square meter, represents the actual energy flow in a sound wave, while sound pressure level, measured in decibels, describes the pressure variation. Intensity describes the rate at which energy passes through a given area. The two are related. Intensity is proportional to the square of pressure, but intensity has a directional component that pressure alone doesn't capture. Measuring acoustic intensity allows engineers to identify which parts of a machine radiate the most sound power, or to determine how much sound energy flows through a window or wall. Intensity measurements require specialized equipment that simultaneously measures pressure and particle velocity, but they provide insights that pressure measurements alone cannot. The reflection of sound in urban canyons, streets flanked by tall buildings, creates acoustic conditions unlike any natural environment. Sound bounces back and forth between parallel building facades, traveling down the street with less attenuation than it would in open space. This channeling effect means that noise from traffic or construction can propagate much farther along streets than across them. The multiple reflections also create complex patterns of interference, with some frequencies reinforced and others canceled, depending on the street width and building heights. Urban acoustic environments are among the most complex to model and predict, with countless reflective surfaces, diffraction around obstacles, and absorption by diverse materials all interacting. Acoustic emission testing detects the tiny sounds that materials make when they crack or deform under stress. As a material begins to fail, the formation and growth of cracks releases energy as sound waves. These acoustic emissions, often ultrasonic, can be detected by sensors attached to the structure. By analyzing the timing, frequency, and intensity of these emissions, engineers can assess structural integrity without destructive testing. Bridges, pressure vessels, and aircraft components are monitored using acoustic emission testing, which can detect problems before they become visible or dangerous. The method essentially listens to the structure telling the story of its own condition through the sounds of its internal changes. The acoustic properties of different atmospheric layers create conditions where sound can reflect from temperature inversions. When a layer of warm air sits above cooler air near the ground, sound waves traveling upward encounter the boundary between these layers. The change in sound speed at the boundary can bend sound waves back toward the ground, creating conditions where sound travels much farther than normal. This acoustic ducting effect is most common at night when the ground cools but air aloft remains warm. Distant sounds, trains, highways, industrial facilities, can become surprisingly audible as sound waves channel through this atmospheric waveguide, reflecting repeatedly between the ground and the temperature inversion above. The way sound moves through crystalline structures reveals another layer of acoustic wonder that unfolds in the quietest corners of material science. When sound waves travel through crystals, they interact with a regular, repeating arrangement of atoms in ways that differ profoundly from their behavior in amorphous materials like glass. The crystalline lattice can guide sound along specific pathways, creating what scientists call phononic crystals, materials engineered to control sound waves with the same precision that photonic crystals control light. These structures can bend sound around corners, focus it into impossibly tight beams, or prevent certain frequencies from propagating at all, creating acoustic band gaps where silence reigns despite the presence of vibration all around. The precision required to manufacture these materials approaches the atomic scale, yet the principles they demonstrate connect directly to the echoes you hear in everyday spaces, just operating at frequencies and dimensions far beyond human perception. The relationship between sound reflection and musical tuning systems carries us into territories where physics meets culture and perception. When a note sounds in a reflective space, the room responds not just to the fundamental frequency, but to all its harmonics, the integer multiples that give each instrument its characteristic voice. Different cultures have developed tuning systems that interact with room acoustics in distinct ways. Western equal temperament, which divides the octave into 12 equal steps, creates harmonics that sometimes clash slightly with the pure mathematical ratios found in just intonation. And these small discrepancies become more apparent in highly reflective spaces where sustained tones linger and overlap. Indian classical music, with its emphasis on microtonal inflections and drone instruments like the tampura, evolved in spaces with particular acoustic properties that allowed these subtle frequency relationships to bloom and resonate. The stone chambers of ancient temples in South India, for instance, possess reverberation times that sustain the drone while allowing melodic passages to remain clear, a balance achieved through centuries of empirical acoustic refinement, encoded in architectural tradition rather than written formulas. Acoustic mirrors on the molecular scale operate in ways that challenge our intuitive understanding of reflection. When sound waves approach frequencies where their wavelengths become comparable to the spacing between molecules in a material, the distinction between propagation and reflection begins to blur. At these scales, individual molecules can act as scattering centers, sending tiny portions of the sound wave in all directions. The cumulative effect of billions of these molecular interactions creates what we perceive as absorption, reflection, or transmission at the macroscopic level. In certain polymers and composites, engineers can tune this molecular scale scattering by adjusting the size and distribution of embedded particles or by creating materials with hierarchical structures, patterns within patterns, each operating at different length scales to affect different frequency ranges. These materials find applications in everything from noise barriers along highways to the acoustic treatments in recording studios. Yet their fundamental behavior connect to the same wave mechanics that govern the echo you hear across a lake. The phenomenon of acoustic daylight imaging represents one of the most elegant applications of sound reflection in medical diagnostics. Unlike conventional ultrasound, which sends pulses into the body and listens for echoes, acoustic daylight imaging uses only passive listening. The technique exploits the fact that body tissues are constantly in thermal motion, generating faint sound waves across a broad spectrum of frequencies. These naturally occurring sounds reflect and scatter from internal structures, tumors, blood vessels, tissue boundaries, creating patterns that sensitive detectors can capture and reconstruct into images. The method requires no external energy input beyond what the body already produces through its thermal activity, making it entirely non-invasive and safe for continuous monitoring. The challenge lies in the extraordinary sensitivity required to detect these whisper-quiet signals amid environmental noise, but advances in sensor technology and signal processing algorithms continue to push the boundaries of what becomes visible through the body's own acoustic illumination. The way sound reflects from moving surfaces introduces the Doppler effect into the realm of echoes, creating phenomena both subtle and profound. When you shout toward an approaching train and listen for the echo, the reflected sound returns at a higher pitch than you sent out, compressed by the train's motion toward you. This Doppler-shifted echo has found applications ranging from weather radar, which uses microwave echoes to measure wind speeds inside storms, to medical ultrasound that tracks blood flow by detecting the frequency shifts in sound reflected from moving red blood cells. Police radar guns operate on the same principle, though with electromagnetic rather than acoustic waves. The mathematics underlying these measurements reveals that even small velocities produce detectable frequency shifts when the original frequency is high enough, which is why ultrasound systems operating at millions of cycles per second can measure blood flow velocities of just a few centimeters per second with remarkable precision. The reflected sound carries within its altered frequency a precise record of the motion that changed it. Architectural acoustics in outdoor amphitheaters reaches a pinnacle of sophistication in the ancient Greek theaters that still function beautifully after more than 2 millennia. Recent studies using modern acoustic measurement techniques have revealed that these structures exploit multiple principles simultaneously to achieve their remarkable clarity. The limestone seating, arranged in specific geometric curves, reflects high-frequency sounds, crucial for speech intelligibility, preferentially toward the audience, while allowing low-frequency sounds to diffract over the top of the structure, reducing rumble and environmental noise. The rows of seats themselves create a periodic structure that filters out certain frequencies of background noise, while preserving the frequencies most important for understanding speech. Even the corrugated surface of the stone seats contributes, scattering sound in ways that reduce the buildup of unwanted echoes while maintaining sufficient reflections to carry the performer's voice to distant seats. These theaters were designed through empirical refinement over generations, yet their acoustic performance rivals or exceeds that of many modern venues designed with the aid of computer modeling. The concept of acoustic reciprocity provides a deep symmetry to the behavior of sound reflection. This principle states that if you can hear someone speaking from position A while standing at position B, then they can equally hear you speaking from position B while standing at position A, with the same clarity and volume. This reciprocity holds regardless of the complexity of reflections between the two positions, whether the sound path involves dozens of echoes off irregular surfaces or a single direct line. The principle emerges from the fundamental time reversibility of the wave equation in non-dissipative media, meaning that sound waves could, in theory, travel backward through all their reflections and arrive precisely at their source. While real materials always involve some absorption that breaks perfect reciprocity, the principle remains remarkably accurate in practice and forms the foundation for various acoustic measurement techniques. It also means that optimal listening positions in a concert hall are, by reciprocity, also optimal positions for sound sources, a fact that influences the placement of both performers and loudspeakers in carefully designed spaces. The interaction between sound reflection and acoustic streaming reveals how sound can generate steady flows and fluids despite being itself an oscillatory phenomenon. When intense sound waves reflect from surfaces in a liquid, the nonlinear properties of fluid mechanics cause the back and forth oscillations to produce a net flow in one direction, typically moving from regions of high acoustic intensity toward regions of lower intensity. This acoustic streaming can be strong enough to move small particles, mix fluids, or even levitate droplets against gravity. In medical applications, acoustic streaming helps deliver drugs through skin without needles, using focused ultrasound to create microscopic flows that carry therapeutic molecules through the tissue. In materials processing, acoustic streaming mixes molten metals or polymers more uniformly than mechanical stirring, since the acoustic forces reach throughout the volume rather than acting only at the surfaces touched by a physical mixer. The phenomenon represents a bridge between the reversible world of wave propagation and the irreversible world of fluid flow, with reflection playing a crucial role in establishing the pressure gradients that drive the streaming motion. The way sound reflects from flexible membranes and thin panels differs fundamentally from reflection off rigid walls, introducing resonance and mode shapes into the acoustic response. A drumhead, for instance, doesn't simply reflect sound like a mirror. Instead, it absorbs energy at certain frequencies where the incoming sound matches the drum's natural vibration modes, then re-radiates that energy over time as the membrane oscillates. This process transforms a sharp impulse into a sustained tone with specific pitch content determined by the membrane's tension, size, and mass. The same principle applies to building panels, windows, and even the human eardrum, each of which has characteristic resonance frequencies where it responds most strongly to incoming sound. In architectural acoustics, these panel resonances can either enhance or degrade the sound quality of a space, depending on whether they occur at frequencies that complement or interfere with the intended use. Thin wood panels in concert halls, for example, are sometimes deliberately tuned to resonate at frequencies that add warmth to the sound of string instruments, effectively acting as secondary soundboards that extend the acoustic character of the instruments themselves into the room. The phenomenon of sound focusing by curved reflectors finds beautiful natural expression in certain geological formations. Parabolic rock faces, carved by wind and water over millions of years, can focus sound with startling precision, creating spots where whispers become clearly audible while remaining inaudible just a few steps away. Some of these natural acoustic lenses occur in desert canyons where differential erosion has carved smooth, curved surfaces from layered rock. The mathematics governing these natural reflectors is identical to that used in designing satellite dishes and telescope mirrors. The parabola's unique property that all rays parallel to its axis reflect through a single focal point. Standing at the focus of such a natural formation, you can hear sound from across a canyon as if they were whispered directly into your ear, while someone standing beside you hears nothing unusual. These acoustic sweet spots were known to indigenous peoples in various parts of the world and sometimes held spiritual significance. Places where the landscape itself seemed to amplify certain voices or sounds in ways that suggested communication with unseen realms. The relationship between room shape and echo pattern becomes especially intricate in spaces with complex geometry. A simple rectangular room produces a relatively predictable pattern of echoes, with reflections arriving from walls, floor, and ceiling in sequences determined by the room's dimensions. But introduce curves, angles, or irregular surfaces, and the echo pattern becomes far more complex. Some shapes produce focusing effects where sound energy concentrates in particular regions, creating hot spots of excessive volume or echo density. Other shapes scatter sound broadly, distributing reflections more evenly throughout the space. The ancient Romans understood these principles empirically and sometimes placed large bronze or clay vessels around amphitheaters, tuned to resonate at specific frequencies, effectively creating distributed resonators that absorbed excess energy at problematic frequencies while leaving desired frequencies unaffected. Modern acoustic consultants use computer simulations to predict how sound will reflect through complex spaces, but the fundamental challenge remains the same: shaping the pattern of reflections to support the intended use of the space, while avoiding acoustic defects like excessive echo, uneven coverage, or disturbing resonances. Acoustic time reversal represents one of the most counterintuitive yet practical applications of sound reflection principles. The technique works by recording the echoes that arrive at an array of sensors after a sound pulse has bounced around a complex environment, then playing those echoes backward through the same sensor array. The time-reversed sound retraces all the reflection paths in reverse, converging precisely at the original source location regardless of how complicated the intervening reflections were. This method has been used to destroy kidney stones without surgery, focusing ultrasound energy at the stone by recording the echoes from a weak pulse, then time-reversing and amplifying the signal to deliver therapeutic energy precisely to the target. The same principle enables communication through highly reverberant environments where normal signals would be scrambled by multiple reflections. Time reversal processing can unscramble the received signal by exploiting rather than fighting the reflections. The technique works because the wave equation remains valid whether time flows forward or backward, a deep symmetry in physics that finds practical expression in these medical and communication applications. The way sound reflects from surfaces covered with vegetation introduces complex scattering that depends on frequency, plant species, and seasonal conditions. A wall covered with dense ivy reflects sound very differently than bare brick, with the leaves and stems creating a rough, irregular surface that scatters high frequencies while allowing low frequencies to reach and reflect from the underlying wall. The acoustic effect changes with the seasons as leaves emerge, grow, and fall, and as the moisture content of the vegetation varies with weather. In forests, this frequency-dependent scattering means that bird songs, which typically contain high-frequency components, don't propagate as far as they would over bare ground, while the low-frequency sounds of larger animals travel farther. This acoustic ecology influences animal communication strategies, with species evolving vocalizations suited to the acoustic properties of their habitats. Some bird species that live in dense forest understory produce songs with predominantly low-frequency components that propagate better through the vegetation, while birds of open grasslands often use higher frequencies that carry well over low vegetation. The pattern of sound reflection from vegetated surfaces thus shapes not just human acoustic experience, but the evolution of animal communication itself. The acoustic properties of snow-covered transform outdoor soundscapes in ways both obvious and subtle. Fresh, fluffy snow contains a high proportion of air trapped between ice crystals, creating an excellent sound absorber, especially at high frequencies. When snow covers the ground, the usual reflections from the Earth's surface diminish dramatically, and the overall acoustic environment becomes noticeably quieter and more muffled. As snow ages and compacts, its acoustic properties change. The air spaces become smaller and more interconnected, reducing the absorption and allowing more sound to reflect from the denser surface. Crusted snow, with a hard frozen surface layer over softer snow beneath, can actually reflect sound quite efficiently, especially at lower frequencies, creating acoustic conditions more similar to bare ground than to fresh snow. These changing acoustic properties affect how sound propagates across snowy landscapes, influencing everything from avalanche detection systems, which listen for the acoustic signatures of snow movement, to the experience of walking through a winter forest where the acoustic environment shifts subtly with each snowfall and thaw cycle. The principle of acoustic levitation exploits sound reflection between closely spaced surfaces to create standing waves capable of suspending small objects against gravity. When sound waves reflect back and forth between two surfaces separated by a distance equal to a half wavelength or multiple half wavelengths, they create regions of high and low pressure that remain stationary in space. Small particles or droplets placed in these standing wave fields experience forces that push them toward the pressure nodes, the quiet spots between the loud regions, and these forces can be strong enough to overcome gravity. Acoustic levitation has been used to containerlessly process materials that would be contaminated by contact with vessel walls, to study the properties of individual droplets suspended in air, and to demonstrate the tangible reality of sound pressure in educational settings. The technique requires high-intensity sound, typically ultrasonic to avoid audible noise, and works best with objects whose size is small compared to the wavelength. The levitated objects hover in what appears to be empty air, held aloft by nothing but the pressure variations in the standing wave created by sound reflecting between surfaces. The acoustic signature of a space, its unique pattern of reflections and resonances, can serve as a fingerprint for identification purposes. Just as every room has a characteristic visual appearance, it also has a characteristic sound, determined by its size, shape, materials, and contents. Forensic audio analysts can sometimes determine where a recording was made by analyzing the pattern of echoes and resonances in the background, comparing them to acoustic measurements from known locations. This acoustic fingerprinting has been used in criminal investigations to verify or refute claims about where recordings were made. The technique also finds applications in architectural acoustics, where measurements of a space's acoustic response can be compared to design predictions to verify that construction achieved its acoustic goals. In some cases, acoustic fingerprinting can even detect changes in a space over time, such as the addition of furnishings or modifications to wall surfaces, by revealing shifts in the pattern of reflections and resonances that characterize the space. The interaction between sound reflection and thermal gradients in the atmosphere creates acoustic mirages, situations where sound appears to come from a direction different from its true source. These effects are most pronounced over surfaces that develop strong temperature gradients, such as hot pavement or cold water. The speed of sound increases with temperature, so when sound waves travel through air layers of different temperatures, they bend toward the cooler, slower regions, much as light bends when passing through materials with different refractive indices. Over hot pavement, sound waves bend upward, creating a shadow zone close to the ground where sound from a distant source cannot reach, while at greater heights the sound remains audible. Over cold water, the opposite occurs. Sound bends downward, extending its range at low heights while potentially creating shadow zones at higher elevations. These acoustic mirages affect everything from how voices carry across water to the design of outdoor sound barriers, which must account for atmospheric refraction to remain effective under varying weather conditions. The way sound reflects from the human body contributes to the acoustic cues we use for spatial awareness. When you hear a sound, a tiny portion of it reflects from your head, shoulders, and outer ears before reaching your eardrums. These reflections arrive just microseconds after the direct sound, too quickly to be perceived as separate echoes, but they modify the frequency content of the sound in ways that depend on the direction for which it arrived. Your brain has learned, through years of experience, to interpret these subtle spectral modifications as cues to sound source location, particularly in the vertical plane and in distinguishing sounds from in front versus behind. The reflections from the outer ear's complex folds, the pinna, create a series of peaks and notches in the frequency response that shift in characteristic ways as the sound source moves in elevation. This head-related transfer function is unique to each individual, shaped by the specific geometry of their head, ears, and shoulders. When audio engineers want to create convincing three-dimensional sound through headphones, they must replicate these personalized reflection patterns, either by measuring an individual's head-related transfer function or by using generic measurements that approximate the average listener's acoustic experience. The acoustic properties of bone and tissue create complex reflection patterns within the human body that medical ultrasound must navigate to create useful images. Different tissues reflect ultrasound to different degrees depending on their density and elasticity. The boundary between soft tissue and bone reflects ultrasound strongly, creating bright lines in ultrasound images, but also blocking the view of structures behind the bone. The boundary between soft tissue and air reflects ultrasound almost completely, which is why ultrasound works poorly for imaging air-filled lungs, but works well for imaging fluid-filled structures like blood vessels and the bladder. Fat and muscle reflect ultrasound differently, allowing technicians to distinguish these tissues in images. The speed of sound varies slightly between different tissues, typically ranging from about 1450 meters per second in fat to 1580 meters per second in muscle, and these variations must be accounted for to accurately measure distances and create properly focused images. The ultrasound system assumes an average sound speed, usually about 1,540 meters per second, which works well for most soft tissues, but can introduce small errors when imaging through tissues with significantly different sound speeds. The phenomenon of acoustic radiation pressure, the steady force exerted by sound waves on surfaces, arises from the reflection and absorption of acoustic momentum. When a sound wave reflects from a surface, it transfers momentum to that surface, just as a ball bouncing off a wall transfers momentum to the wall. For ordinary sound levels, this radiation pressure is far too small to notice, but at the high intensities used in ultrasound applications, it becomes significant. Acoustic radiation pressure is what enables acoustic levitation, what pushes particles in acoustic streaming flows, and what allows focused ultrasound to mechanically manipulate tissue in medical applications. The pressure is proportional to the intensity of the sound and depends on whether the surface reflects or absorbs the sound. A perfectly reflecting surface experiences twice the radiation pressure of a perfectly absorbing surface because the reflected wave carries momentum back away from the surface, requiring a larger momentum change, and thus a larger force on the surface. This relationship between reflection and radiation pressure finds applications in acoustic tweezers, which use focused ultrasound beams to trap and move microscopic particles, and in ultrasound-based particle sorting systems that separate cells or other biological materials based on their size and acoustic properties. The acoustic behavior of foams and porous materials reveals how structure at multiple scales influences sound reflection and absorption. Open-cell foams, where the bubbles are interconnected, allow sound waves to enter the material and dissipate energy through viscous friction as air moves through the narrow passages between cells. These materials absorb sound efficiently but reflect relatively little. Closed-cell foams, where each bubble is sealed, reflect more sound from their surfaces but absorb less because sound cannot easily penetrate into the material's interior. The frequency range over which a foam absorbs sound depends on the cell size and the thickness of the foam layer. Larger cells and thicker layers extend absorption to lower frequencies, while smaller cells and thinner layers work best at higher frequencies. Many acoustic foams used in studios and auditoriums have pyramidal or wedge-shaped surfaces that further reduce reflections by presenting a gradual impedance transition from air to foam, much as anti-reflection coatings on eyeglasses reduce light reflections by providing a gradual transition in refractive index. The result is a material that not only absorbs sound, but also minimizes the reflections that do occur, preventing echoes while controlling reverberation. The way sound reflects in urban canyons, the spaces between tall buildings, creates acoustic environments quite unlike either indoor spaces or open outdoor areas. Sound can reflect back and forth between parallel building facades multiple times, creating flutter echoes and extended reverberation that would never occur in open space. The hard surfaces typical of urban construction, concrete, glass, steel, reflect sound efficiently, especially at mid and high frequencies, while absorbing relatively little. This creates soundscapes where traffic noise, construction sounds, and human voices persist longer and propagate farther than they would in less reflective environments. Urban acoustic designers increasingly consider these reflection patterns when planning new developments, sometimes introducing sound-absorbing materials on building facades, varying building heights to break up parallel surfaces, or designing building shapes that scatter sound rather than focusing it. The goal is to reduce noise pollution while maintaining the acoustic vitality that makes urban spaces feel alive and engaging. Some cities have even implemented acoustic zoning, recognizing that different areas require different acoustic environments: quiet residential zones, lively commercial districts, and industrial areas where higher noise levels are acceptable. The relationship between sound reflection and room volume follows patterns that acoustic designers have quantified through decades of research. Larger rooms generally have longer reverberation times because sound travels farther between reflections, and more time elapses before the sound energy decays below audibility. But volume alone doesn't determine reverberation time. The surface area and absorption properties of the boundaries matter just as much. A large room with highly absorptive surfaces can have a shorter reverberation time than a smaller room with reflective surfaces. The Sabine equation, formulated over a century ago, captures this relationship mathematically, relating reverberation time to room volume and total absorption. The equation works best for rooms where sound reflects diffusely from irregular surfaces rather than creating distinct echoes, and where the absorption is distributed relatively evenly around the room. In practice, acoustic consultants use more sophisticated models that account for the directional properties of sound sources, the non-uniform distribution of absorption, and the way low-frequency sound behaves differently than high-frequency sound. But the fundamental insight remains. Reverberation time depends on the balance between room volume, which stores acoustic energy, and surface absorption, which removes it. The acoustic properties of ice create distinctive soundscapes in polar and high-altitude environments. Ice reflects sound efficiently, especially when the surface is smooth and hard, creating echoes that carry clearly across frozen landscapes. The speed of sound in ice is much higher than in air, about 3,800 meters per second compared to 340 meters per second. So sound travels quickly through ice structures and can propagate long distances through ice sheets and glaciers. This property allows scientists to use acoustic techniques to study ice thickness, internal structure, and the presence of water or cracks. When ice cracks or shifts, it generates distinctive sounds that propagate both through the ice itself and through the air above, creating the eerie groans and booms that characterize calving glaciers and shifting ice sheets. The acoustic environment of polar regions is also shaped by the snow cover, which absorbs high-frequency sounds, and by temperature inversions, which can create acoustic ducts that channel sound along the boundary between air layers of different temperatures, allowing sounds to propagate far beyond their normal range. The way sound reflects from curved surfaces introduces focusing effects that can be either beneficial or problematic, depending on the application. A concave surface focuses sound toward a point, just as a concave mirror focuses light, creating a region of high sound intensity at the focal point. In a room with a curved ceiling, this can create hot spots where sound is uncomfortably loud, while leaving other areas relatively quiet. Architects have learned to avoid large concave surfaces in performance spaces, or to treat them with absorption to prevent focusing. But the same focusing effect finds beneficial applications in acoustic mirrors, parabolic microphones, and medical ultrasound systems, where the goal is precisely to concentrate sound energy at a specific location. Convex surfaces, by contrast, scatter sound broadly, distributing reflections over a wide area and helping to create diffuse sound fields. Many modern concert halls incorporate convex surfaces, curved panels, cylinders, or hemispheres, to scatter reflections and ensure that sound reaches all parts of the audience with similar quality. The interplay between focusing and scattering, between concentration and distribution, shapes the acoustic character of spaces and determines whether reflections enhance or degrade the listening experience. The phenomenon of acoustic shadows, regions where sound cannot reach due to obstacles or refraction, reveals how sound propagation depends on more than just distance from the source. Behind a large obstacle like a building or hill, a sound shadow forms where the sound level drops significantly compared to areas with a direct line of sight to the source. The depth and extent of this shadow depend on frequency. Low-frequency sounds diffract around obstacles more readily than high-frequency sounds, so the shadow is deeper and more complete at high frequencies. Atmospheric conditions also create acoustic shadows through refraction, bending sound waves up or down depending on wind and temperature gradients. During the American Civil War, there are documented cases of battles that were inaudible just a few miles away due to acoustic shadows created by atmospheric conditions, while being clearly audible at much greater distances in other directions. These acoustic shadows puzzled observers of the time and weren't fully understood until the science of atmospheric acoustics developed in the 20th century. Today, acoustic shadow zones are considered in the design of outdoor sound systems, airport noise mitigation, and military acoustic sensing, all applications where understanding where sound can and cannot reach is crucial. The way musical instruments use reflection within their bodies to shape their sound reveals the intimate relationship between structure and tone. A violin's body acts as a complex resonator, with sound from the vibrating strings reflecting from the internal surfaces, exciting resonances in the wooden plates, and radiating from the F-holes and patterns that give the instrument its characteristic voice. The exact shape of the body, the thickness and stiffness of the wood, the position and size of the bass bar and sound post. All these factors influence how sound reflects internally and how the instrument responds to different frequencies. Master luthiers spend lifetimes learning to shape these properties through subtle adjustments to the instrument's construction. Similarly, the body of an acoustic guitar, the bell of a trumpet, the bore of a flute, each uses reflections and resonances to transform the simple vibrations of strings, lips, or air jets into the rich, complex sounds we recognize as musical. The reflection patterns within these instruments are so complex that they still resist complete mathematical description, despite sophisticated computer modeling. The sound emerges from the interplay of thousands of reflections, each contributing to the whole in ways that depend on frequency, amplitude, and time. The acoustic properties of different gases reveal how the medium itself shapes sound reflection and propagation. In helium, sound travels about 3 times faster than in air due to helium's lower density, creating the familiar chipmunk voice effect when someone speaks after inhaling helium. But this speed change also affects how sound reflects from surfaces. The wavelength of a given frequency is longer in helium, so the acoustic properties of a room change when filled with helium, with resonances shifting to different frequencies. In sulfur hexafluoride, a very dense gas, sound travels more slowly than in air, deepening voices and shifting resonances downward. These effects demonstrate that acoustic properties depend not just on geometry and materials, but on the medium carrying the sound. In industrial applications, the speed of sound in different gases is used to identify gas composition. By measuring how sound reflects within a container of gas, sensors can determine what gases are present and in what proportions. The same principles apply in understanding planetary atmospheres. The acoustic properties of Mars's thin carbon dioxide atmosphere differ dramatically from Earth's, affecting everything from how sound would propagate across the Martian surface to how seismic waves from Marsquakes travel through the planet's interior. The interaction between sound reflection and wind creates complex acoustic environments that shift with changing weather. Wind carries sound downwind more effectively than upwind, but this is only part of the story. Wind speed typically increases with height above the ground due to friction with the surface, creating a wind gradient that refracts sound waves. Downwind, this gradient bends sound toward the ground, extending the range at which sound can be heard. Upwind, sound bends upward, creating shadow zones where sound from a distant source cannot reach. These effects can be dramatic. A source clearly audible downwind might be completely inaudible at the same distance upwind. The wind also creates turbulence that scatters sound, breaking up wave fronts and creating fluctuations in loudness and tone. On a windy day, these effects combine with reflections from the ground and from obstacles to create an acoustic environment in constant flux, where sounds seem to appear and disappear, grow loud and fade, as wind patterns shift and sound paths change. Understanding these effects is crucial for outdoor sound system design, environmental noise assessment, and any application where sound must propagate reliably through outdoor spaces. The way sound reflects from a sea surface depends on the state of the sea in ways that oceanographers have learned to exploit for remote sensing. A calm sea surface reflects sound much like a mirror, especially at low frequencies. But as waves develop, the surface becomes rough, scattering sound in many directions rather than reflecting it specularly. The degree of scattering depends on the relationship between the sound wavelength and the size of the waves. When the wavelength is much larger than the wave height, the surface still reflects relatively smoothly, but when the wavelength becomes comparable to or smaller than the wave height, scattering dominates. By measuring how sound reflects from the sea surface at different frequencies and angles, scientists can infer the wave height and surface roughness, providing information about wind speed and sea state. This acoustic remote sensing complements satellite observations and provides data even in conditions where optical or radar measurements are difficult. The technique also works in reverse. By understanding how sound scatters from the sea surface, sonar systems can filter out surface reflections to better detect submarines or other underwater objects, distinguishing the echoes of interest from the clutter created by the moving, reflecting surface above. The acoustic properties of textiles and fabrics introduce reflection control into everyday environments in subtle but important ways. Heavy curtains absorb sound, especially at mid and high frequencies, reducing reflections and shortening reverberation time. The effect depends on the fabric's weight, weave, and how it's hung. Fabric gathered in folds absorbs more sound than fabric stretched flat because the folds create air gaps that trap sound energy. Carpets and upholstered furniture similarly absorb sound, with thicker materials and looser weaves generally providing more absorption. These effects shape the acoustic character of living spaces, making furnished rooms sound warmer and less reverberant than empty rooms with bare walls and floors. Acoustic designers sometimes use fabric strategically to control reflections, hanging banners or curtains to absorb sound where needed, while leaving other surfaces reflective. In recording studios and home theaters, acoustic panels covered with fabric provide absorption while maintaining a finished appearance. The acoustic properties of textiles connect to their structure at multiple scales: the fiber material, the weave pattern, the thickness, and the mounting method, all influencing how sound interacts with the fabric and how much reflects back into the space. The relationship between sound reflection and speech intelligibility has driven acoustic design throughout human history. For speech to be understood clearly, early reflections, those arriving within about 50 milliseconds of the direct sound, must support rather than obscure the direct sound. These early reflections add loudness and fullness without being perceived as separate echoes. Later reflections, arriving after 50 milliseconds, can reduce intelligibility by creating a reverberant tail that masks the consonants and transients crucial for understanding speech. The balance between these early and late reflections determines speech intelligibility in spaces ranging from classrooms to conference rooms to houses of worship. Acoustic designers shape this balance by controlling room geometry, placing reflective surfaces where they'll create useful early reflections and absorptive surfaces where they'll reduce problematic late reflections. The challenge is that the optimal acoustic conditions for speech differ from those for music. Speech benefits from a relatively dry acoustic with short reverberation time and strong early reflections, while music often benefits from longer reverberation and a more diffuse sound field. Multipurpose spaces must compromise or incorporate adjustable elements, movable panels, retractable curtains, variable absorption, to optimize acoustics for different uses. The way sound reflects in forests creates acoustic environments that change with the seasons and with the time of day. In summer, when trees are fully leafed, the canopy absorbs and scatters sound, creating a relatively quiet environment where sounds don't carry far. In winter, when deciduous trees are bare, sound propagates farther and reflects more clearly from the ground and remaining trunks. The forest floor itself affects reflections. Leaf litter absorbs high-frequency sounds, while frozen or snow-covered ground reflects sound differently than bare soil. These seasonal acoustic changes affect animal behavior, with some species adjusting their vocalizations or activity patterns to account for changing acoustic conditions. The vertical structure of forests also matters. In forests with dense understory vegetation, sound reflects and scatters at multiple heights, creating a complex acoustic environment quite different from forests with open understory beneath a high canopy. Time of day brings additional changes as temperature gradients develop, affecting how sound refracts and propagates through the forest air. The result is an acoustic environment in constant flux, shaped by the interplay of reflection, absorption, scattering, and refraction across multiple scales and time frames. The phenomenon of acoustic cloaking, making objects invisible to sound, relies on carefully controlling how sound reflects from surfaces. By surrounding an object with a shell of metamaterial engineered to have specific acoustic properties, researchers have demonstrated that sound waves can be guided around the object as if it weren't there, with no reflection or shadow to reveal its presence. The metamaterial must have properties that vary precisely with position, guiding sound smoothly around the cloaked region and then back to its original path. This requires materials with acoustic properties, density and compressibility, that don't exist in nature, achieved through structure materials whose properties emerge from their geometry rather than their composition. Acoustic cloaking remains largely experimental, with demonstrations at specific frequencies under controlled conditions. But the principles it embodies, that reflection can be eliminated through careful impedance matching and wave guidance, find practical applications in acoustic treatments that minimize unwanted reflections without requiring thick, absorptive materials. The same mathematics that describes acoustic cloaking also applies to acoustic lenses, acoustic waveguides, and other devices that control sound by shaping how it reflects and refracts. The way sound reflects in caves has fascinated humans since prehistoric times, and evidence suggests that some cave paintings were created in locations with particularly interesting acoustic properties. Researchers studying painted caves in Europe have found correlations between the locations of paintings and the presence of strong echoes or resonances, suggesting that our ancestors may have chosen these acoustically special locations for their art. The reverberant, echoing quality of deep caves could have enhanced ritual activities, making voices and percussion sound more powerful and otherworldly. Some caves contain formations, stalactites, stalagmites, flowstone curtains, that ring like bells when struck, producing clear, sustained tones that carry through the cave's passages. These natural lithophones may have been used as musical instruments, with the cave itself acting as a resonant chamber, amplifying and sustaining the tones. The acoustic properties of caves continue to inspire contemporary artists and musicians, who create performances in caves to explore the unique sonic possibilities of these natural spaces, where every sound reflects from stone surfaces shaped over millions of years. The relationship between sound reflection and the Doppler effect creates interesting phenomena when both source and reflector are moving. If you're driving past a wall while playing music, the sound that reflects from the wall back to you is Doppler shifted twice. Once because you're moving toward the wall as the sound travels outward, and again because you're moving away from the wall as the reflection travels back. The net result is a frequency shift that depends on your velocity and the angle between your motion and the wall. This double Doppler shift is used in some velocity measurement systems, where sound or radio waves reflect from moving objects, and a frequency shift of the echo reveals the object's velocity. The same principle applies in medical ultrasound when measuring blood flow. The ultrasound reflects from moving red blood cells, and the frequency shift of the echo indicates how fast the blood is flowing. The mathematics of these double Doppler shifts can become quite complex when the motion is not directly toward or away from the reflector, but the underlying principle remains. Each reflection from a moving surface shifts the frequency, and multiple reflections or movements compound these shifts in predictable ways. The acoustic properties of different building materials shape not just the sound within buildings, but also how sound escapes to the exterior. Dense, stiff materials like concrete and brick reflect sound efficiently, but also transmit relatively little sound through their thickness, providing good sound isolation between spaces. Lightweight materials like drywall reflect less efficiently and transmit more sound, requiring careful construction with air gaps and insulation to achieve good isolation. Windows present particular challenges because glass is relatively light and stiff, allowing it to vibrate in response to sound and transmit noise between interior and exterior. Double glazed windows with large air gaps perform better than single glazing, and laminated glass with a polymer interlayer provides even better sound isolation by damping vibrations in the glass. The acoustic performance of building assemblies, walls, floors, ceilings, depends not just on the materials, but on how they're constructed, with gaps, flanking paths, and resonances all affecting how sound reflects within the assembly and how much transmits through. Acoustic consultants must consider all these factors when designing buildings where sound control is important, balancing reflection, absorption, and transmission to achieve the desired acoustic environment. The way sound reflects in the human vocal tract shapes the vowels and resonances that characterize speech. When you speak, your vocal cords produce a buzzing sound rich in harmonics. But the sound that emerges from your mouth has been filtered by the resonances of your throat, mouth, and nasal cavities. These cavities act as acoustic filters, reflecting sound at their boundaries and creating standing waves at certain frequencies called formants. By changing the shape of your vocal tract, raising or lowering your tongue, opening or closing your jaw, rounding or spreading your lips, you change the pattern of reflections and thus the formant frequencies, producing different vowel sounds. The first two formants are particularly important for vowel identity. The vowel E has a high second formant, while OO has a low second formant, and listeners use these formant patterns to identify vowels regardless of the fundamental frequency of the voice. Consonants involve more complex articulations, often including brief closures or constrictions that create noise bursts or friction sounds, but vowels emerge primarily from the reflection patterns in the vocal tract that shape the voice source into recognizable speech sounds. The acoustic environment of deserts creates unique soundscapes shaped by the absence of vegetation, the presence of temperature gradients, and the reflective properties of sand and rock. Sound can carry for long distances across flat desert terrain, especially at night when temperature inversions create acoustic ducts that channel sound along the ground. During the day, strong heating creates turbulent air that scatters sound and reduces its range, while mirages, caused by the same temperature gradients, can be accompanied by acoustic mirages where sound appears to come from directions different from its true source. Sand dunes can produce distinctive sounds when the sand avalanches down steep slopes. Some dunes emit low-frequency booming sounds that can be heard for miles, generated by the synchronized motion of millions of sand grains creating a coherent acoustic wave. The mechanism behind these booming dunes remains not fully understood, but it involves the reflection and reinforcement of sound waves within the sliding sand layer. Desert canyons and rock formations create complex echo patterns, with sound reflecting from multiple surfaces and returning to the listener from various directions, creating the sense of space and depth that characterizes these stark landscapes. The way sound reflects from the ground affects outdoor sound propagation in ways that depend on ground surface properties and atmospheric conditions. Soft ground like grass or snow absorbs sound, especially at higher frequencies, reducing the strength of ground reflections. Hard ground like pavement or frozen earth reflects sound efficiently, and these ground reflections can interfere with the direct sound from a source, creating patterns of reinforcement and cancellation that depend on frequency and the heights of the source and receiver. This ground effect causes sound levels to fluctuate with distance in outdoor environments, rather than decreasing smoothly as they would in free space. At some frequencies and distances, the ground reflection arrives out of phase with the direct sound and cancels it, creating dips in the received sound level. At other frequencies and distances, the reflection reinforces the direct sound, creating peaks. These effects are most pronounced at low heights above the ground, and at frequencies where the wavelength is comparable to the path length difference between direct and reflected sound. Acoustic modelers must account for ground effects when predicting environmental noise from sources like highways, airports, or industrial facilities, as the ground properties can significantly affect sound levels at nearby receptors. The relationship between sound reflection and architectural heritage has led to efforts to preserve and document the acoustic properties of historically significant spaces. Just as we preserve the visual appearance of historic buildings, acoustic researchers argue that we should also preserve their sonic character, the particular pattern of reflections and resonances that gives each space its unique acoustic identity. Some historic theaters, churches, and concert halls have acoustic properties that cannot be replicated in modern construction, either because the building techniques are no longer used or because the acoustic properties emerge from centuries of modification and adaptation. Acoustic measurements of these spaces, captured using sophisticated techniques that record how sound reflects throughout the volume, can preserve this acoustic heritage even if the physical space is altered or destroyed. These measurements can also guide restoration efforts, helping architects understand the original acoustic design intent and avoid modifications that would degrade the acoustic quality. In some cases, acoustic measurements have revealed hidden architectural features, sealed chambers, altered ceiling heights, removed balconies, by showing how sound reflects in ways inconsistent with the visible structure. The phenomenon of nonlinear acoustics introduces effects where intense sound waves interact with themselves and with the medium in ways that generate new frequencies and alter reflection properties. At high amplitudes, the pressure variations in a sound wave become large enough that the medium's properties change during the wave's passage. This creates harmonic distortion, where a pure tone generates overtones at integer multiples of the original frequency. It also creates sum and difference frequencies when two tones are present simultaneously, a phenomenon used in parametric speakers that generate audible sound from the interaction of two ultrasonic beams. Nonlinear effects become important in medical ultrasound, where high-intensity, focused beams can generate harmonic frequencies that reflect differently from tissue than the fundamental frequency, sometimes providing better image quality. In architectural acoustics, nonlinear effects are usually negligible because sound levels remain modest, but in high-power applications like ultrasonic cleaning or industrial sonics, nonlinear propagation and reflection must be considered. The mathematics of nonlinear acoustics is considerably more complex than linear wave theory, requiring numerical methods to predict how intense sound waves will propagate and reflect in realistic situations. The way sound reflects in the inner ear completes the journey from external acoustic environment to neural perception. Sound waves traveling through the air cause the eardrum to vibrate, and these vibrations are transmitted through the middle ear bones to the fluid-filled cochlea. Within the cochlea, sound travels as a pressure wave through the fluid, reflecting from the boundaries and exciting the basilar membrane, a structure that varies in stiffness along its length. High-frequency sounds excite the stiff, narrow base of the basilar membrane, while low-frequency sounds travel farther along the membrane to excite the wider, more flexible apex. This spatial mapping of frequency along the basilar membrane forms the basis of our frequency discrimination, allowing us to perceive the pitch of sounds and to separate multiple sounds occurring simultaneously. The hair cells that sit on the basilar membrane convert the mechanical vibrations into neural signals, completing the transformation from acoustic reflection in the environment to electrical patterns in the nervous system. The entire auditory system, from external ear to cochlea to auditory cortex, is shaped by the need to capture, analyze, and interpret the patterns of sound reflection that characterize our acoustic environment. And so the journey through sound reflection draws toward its close, though the echoes continue, carrying forward through time and space in patterns both predictable and surprising. We've traced sound from its origins in vibration, through its travels across air and water, stone and ice, through its reflections from surfaces natural and constructed, and into the intricate machinery of perception that allows these pressure variations to become experience. The science of echoes reveals a world where every surface speaks, where geometry becomes music, where the shape of space determines the character of sound. It's a world governed by elegant mathematical principles, yet full of subtle variations that resist simple description. A world where ancient builders achieved acoustic marvels through empirical refinement, and modern engineers use sophisticated tools to predict and control reflection patterns. As you rest now, perhaps you can hear the acoustic character of the space around you with new appreciation. The slight echo from distant walls, the absorption of soft furnishings, the way sounds arrive at your ears colored by reflections from your body and the room's boundaries. Every space has its voice, its particular way of responding to sound, shaped by reflection patterns too complex to fully analyze, yet immediately perceptible to the listening mind. The science we've explored tonight provides a framework for understanding these acoustic environments, but the experience remains immediate and visceral, requiring no conscious analysis to appreciate. The study of sound reflection continues to evolve, with new applications emerging in medicine, materials science, communication technology, and architectural design. Researchers develop metamaterials with acoustic properties never found in nature, design spaces with precisely controlled reflection patterns, and use sound reflection to probe structures from the molecular scale to the planetary scale. Yet the fundamental principles remain those discovered over centuries of observation and experimentation. That sound reflects according to predictable laws, that the angle of incidence equals the angle of reflection, that smooth surfaces create clear echoes while rough surfaces scatter sound diffusely, that the speed of sound in a medium determines how reflections interfere and combine. If you're still awake, still following these thoughts through the quiet hours, know that there are countless other journeys we might take through the landscape of science, other phenomena to explore, other principles to unfold, other connections to trace between the physical world and human experience. The realm of acoustics alone contains depths we've barely touched. The physics of musical instruments, the psychoacoustics of perception, the bioacoustics of animal communication, the geoacoustics of earth and ocean. Each area offers its own richness, its own patterns of reflection and resonance, both literal and metaphorical. But for now, for tonight, perhaps it's enough to rest with the knowledge that sound surrounds us always, reflecting from every surface, carrying information about the spaces we inhabit and the world beyond our immediate perception. The echoes that return to us are messages from the environment, telling us about distance and direction, about the size and shape of spaces, about the materials that bound our acoustic world. We are bathed in these reflections, usually unaware of the complexity of the acoustic information our ears and brain process effortlessly, extracting meaning from patterns of pressure that arrive at our eardrums from countless directions, having bounced and scattered and interfered in ways that encode the structure of our surroundings. The science of sound reflection, like all science, represents humanity's attempt to understand the patterns we observe, to find the principles underlying the phenomena we experience. It's a project that has occupied minds for millennia and will continue as long as curiosity persists. Each generation builds on the discoveries of the previous, extending understanding into new domains, finding new applications, asking new questions. The echoes we study today connect us to ancient observers who first noticed that sound bounces from cliffs, to medieval scholars who pondered the nature of sound, to Renaissance scientists who began quantifying acoustic phenomena, to modern researchers pushing the boundaries of what's possible with controlled sound reflection. Your breathing may have slowed as these ideas have unfolded, your mind perhaps drifting between attention and rest, catching some thoughts fully while others pass like distant echoes. This is natural and welcome. The goal has never been to memorize facts or master concepts, but simply to provide a gentle stream of ideas that might ease the transition from wakefulness to sleep, offering the mind something to contemplate that is interesting without being exciting, complex without being demanding, informative without requiring effort. The acoustic environment around you right now, wherever you are, contains all the principles we've discussed: reflection and absorption, interference and diffraction, resonance and reverberation. The sound of your breathing reflects from nearby surfaces and returns to your ears. The ambient sounds of the night, wind, distant traffic, the settling of structures, reflect and scatter before reaching you. Their character shaped by the acoustic properties of the environment. Even in silence, the potential for sound remains, waiting for vibration to set air in motion and create the pressure variations that will propagate, reflect, and eventually fade back into stillness. There is something deeply calming about understanding that the world operates according to principles we can discover and describe, that the apparent complexity of phenomena, like echoes, resolves into comprehensible patterns when examined carefully. It provides a sense of order, of predictability, of connection to the long human tradition of seeking to understand rather than merely experience. Yet this understanding need not diminish the wonder. Indeed, knowing how sound reflects often enhances appreciation for the acoustic environments we inhabit, revealing subtleties that might otherwise pass unnoticed. As this exploration draws to its end, as the ideas settle, and the voice that has guided you through these reflections prepares to fall silent, you might simply allow yourself to rest with whatever thoughts remain. Perhaps you'll notice the acoustics of your space with new awareness. Or perhaps these ideas will fade into dreams where sound behaves in ways both familiar and strange. Perhaps you'll sleep soundly, the information absorbed and processed below the level of conscious thought. Or perhaps you'll drift in that pleasant state between waking and sleeping, where thoughts flow freely without the need for logical connection. The world of sound reflection will continue whether we observe it or not. Echoes bouncing through canyons and concert halls, through the ocean depths and the atmosphere, through the built environment and the natural world. The principles we've explored tonight govern these reflections, shaping the acoustic character of every space, creating the sonic texture of existence. And somewhere, always, someone is listening, measuring, studying, designing, or simply appreciating the way sound moves through space and returns transformed by its journey. If you're still here, still awake, still following these final thoughts, there's no urgency to sleep, no requirement to do anything but rest comfortably and let time pass as it will. The night holds space for both sleep and wakefulness, for thought and for the absence of thought. These words will end, but the quiet will remain. And in that quiet you might hear, if you listen, the subtle acoustics of your environment, the particular way this space responds to sound, shaped by reflections you now understand a little better than before. Thank you for traveling through these ideas about echoes and sound reflection, for lending your attention to this exploration of how sound bounces and returns, how spaces shape sound, and sound reveals spaces. May your rest be peaceful, your sleep deep, and your dreams, if they come, as gentle as the softest echo fading into silence.